In a time where mysterious dungeon entrances randomly appear around the world, humanity discovers that they can raid it to earn money and prevent evil creatures from exiting the said portals. When one of these dungeon entrances appears in the home of the best-selling author Cheng Hai, he is left with no choice but to become an adventurer and raid the dungeon himself. However, Cheng Hai is aware of the casualties, armed with the knowledge that the death toll for adventurers is at an all-time high. Does the skinny writer have what it takes to transform into a seasoned adventurer? Let's find out. It's year 2022 in Dongshan City, and Cheng Hai is having the biggest crisis of his life. A purple-like portal just appeared in his house, and it was one of those dreaded dungeon entrances. Nobody knows how or why these things appeared, but back in 2012, dungeon entrances randomly appeared all over the globe. After a series of explorations, looting, development, and riots, the government discovered 5 things. First, the entrance can't be destroyed, but raiding the dungeons inside them can shut them down. Second, if these dungeons aren't raided, monsters will escape into the human world. Third, those who survive the dungeons will become heroes. Fourth, you'll get higher rewards if you kill high-level monsters. And lastly, the so-called dungeon boss is indestructible, and not even a nuclear weapon can take it down. After 10 days after the first appearance of the entrances, more dungeons were raided until it became a norm. Over the years, details about these dungeons and the adventurers braving them became public knowledge. It turned into a trendy pursuit, with increasing numbers of people drawn to the adventure lifestyle, due to the promising financial rewards. However, behind this glamorous facade, people remain unaware of the casualties in those dungeons. Cheng Hai knows all too well about the grim reality of the death toll in dungeon raids. If his memory serves him right, 5 years ago, the beginner-ranked dungeon's death rate was 50%. That is too big of a risk, and he doesn't even need the money because he already has a steady income as a best-selling author. Cheng Hai doesn't want to deal with it, so he plans to call the official Adventurers Guild and make arrangements to relocate to a new apartment. He also heard that if a civilian reports a dungeon entrance, they will get the mysterious treasures inside it. Seems like a good deal, right? Just then, Cheng Hai receives a notification alert informing him that a guild staff got arrested by the police for reselling dungeon entrances. What a good way to ruin his business racket. This leaves him reassessing his plans. If he ends up with a guild staff who happens to be a scammer, it would literally be like walking into a trap. Selling to companies isn't an option either because they can only use it 10 times. To ensure that Cheng Hai won't use it, they'll be keeping a close eye on him and might even kill him for profit. Okay, so a business venture isn't so good after all. However, he can't just leave it because the monsters might escape into the human world. If someone died because of that, he'll end up in jail for sure. Before he does anything rash, Cheng Hai checks what kind of dungeon he has. If the death rate is high, then he might have to move to another city and leave the matter to the police. But if it's reasonable, then he'll opt to raid it himself. As Cheng Hai checks the dungeon on the internet, he discovers that it's a level 2 hunting-type dungeon with a favorable survival rate of 80%. I guess I see where this is going. After 2 days, a package arrives for Cheng Hai. However, the delivery guy's random question makes his cheeks freeze because he asks if the package is for a dungeon raid. Because why would he buy a chainmail, right? Cheng Hai makes a quick excuse, saying that he likes to play adventures with his friends. Right, definitely convinced him there, my dude. For some reason, the delivery guy buys this stupid alibi and goes off clueless. Cheng Hai can't blame the guy for being nosy, as he knows that the average person dreams of becoming an adventurer. When he's finally alone, Cheng Hai tries the chainmail on. Look at that drip. The material feels a bit heavy, and it's tight on his chest, but it does allow him to move freely. He also bought an axe from a nearby firefighter store, which finishes the whole look. With his OOTD ready, Cheng Hai prepares for the adventure that awaits. Upon entering the dungeon, Cheng Hai finds himself in the middle of a forest. He's quite hyped, and he's ready to kill some monsters. However, he does the basics first, such as activating the status window. Based on his foundation attributes, the highest one is his wisdom, which is great because you can't really improve that, like you do with strength and agility. I guess when you're dumb, you really can't change that. Huh. Cheng Hai gets a little too cocky about his greatest attribute, but he keeps his cool. He then checks out his first mission, but he gets pissed when he discovers that he has to kill a murloc. Cheng Hai is allergic to seafood, so this isn't the best challenge to start with. Hours later, he spots a lone murloc, so he quickly lunges at it. To his surprise, this creature has some sick reflexes, and it dodges Cheng Hai's attack. Not only that, it attacks him back with the spear that it's holding. After fighting the murloc all day long, Cheng Hai finally manages to kill it. If a single murloc is this strong, then imagine a horde of it. As Cheng Hai checks his status window, he discovers that his level has been upgraded. That would have been good news. But then he finds that his profession is not registered in the status window. I guess being a writer isn't legit in this world. Cheng Hai brushes it off, determined to get the hell out and call it a day. As he leaves the place, he thinks about getting a private coach to help increase his other attributes. When he finally gets better in combat, then he'll return to the dungeon. Not long after, Cheng Hai makes it back to his house, exhausted after having his longest exercise in a while. Just then, he receives a notification, as he's supposed to get an item after every mission that he completes. He expects a potion that will permanently boost his other attributes, but the status window merely gifts him with a measly white thermos. Well, at least he has a water bottle that can store 500 millimeters of water. Right. Cheng Hai isn't too happy about it. That's for sure. Days later, Cheng Hai heads to Whale's gym, where he got an instructor to help him increase his other attributes. He never thought that his city had fitness instructors who specialize in training for adventurers, but it turns out there are. This trainer is quite costly enough to pay for a copyright fee, but Cheng Hai figures that he has to invest in it to earn more from the raids. The trainer's assistant suddenly asks if he has any gym experience. I think it's quite obvious. Cheng Hai bluntly says no, and the assistant finds this odd, as a newbie like Cheng Hai has spent so much money on this trainer when he could have gotten a normal trainer. The assistant then teases him, saying he seems to be in a rush. Cheng Hai replies that he has money to spend, so why not invest it in a good trainer? Realizing that his excuse is justifiable, the assistant finally welcomes Cheng Hai to meet the best trainer in all of Dongshan. Cheng Hai's knees wobble, nervous to meet the legendary coach, Onran. But wait, this guy? Why does Coach On look like a European twink? Cheng Hai is disappointed, as he thought this guy would be muscular enough to throw him to a wall. Just then, a huge shadow casts behind him, and it's no other than the colossal trainer himself, Coach Onran. Well, Cheng Hai definitely got what he wanted, but at what cost? Coach On immediately makes Cheng Hai do a bunch of bench pressing, leaving him gasping for his life. When Coach On calls for a break, he tells Cheng Hai that his bench press performance is trash. Darn, that's harsh. Cheng Hai knew he was weak, but he didn't expect himself to be such a wimp. Meanwhile, Coach On's other student, dashing Prince Charming, comments that Cheng Hai's foundation is bad. With his single maximum weight being 35 kilograms, he is not even ranked as average compared to the other adventurers. Coach On agrees, adding that Cheng Hai won't be able to catch up to the newbie adventurers if he doesn't master the 3 foundation attribute training. Hearing this, Cheng Hai then asks how long it will take to make himself a competent adventurer. Coach On replies that it will take an entire season, and he has to train every day to earn a score of 11 in the 3 foundation attributes. Determined to reach his goal, Cheng Hai tells Coach On to train him according to his season's standard. Prince Charming, whose actual name is Shu Mao, is pleased to have Cheng Hai join him during their workouts. He reveals his status as a contracted adventurer, prompting Cheng Hai to reciprocate by mentioning his success as a best-selling author. Later that day, Cheng Hai and Shu Mao head to a burger joint for some snacks. Shu Mao wonders why Cheng Hai availed Coach On's expensive services when he's only a newbie. If he's not rushing for time, he can get a private trainer to get stronger while spending minimally. Usually, people sign a long-term association with a company, like Shu Mao did with Whale's Gym, and then they will get a professional trainer like Coach On. However, Cheng Hai replies that his books are selling well, so he's not really short on money. He wants to be a competent adventurer, so he wants Coach On to set his foundations right. Shu Mao sighs, disappointed upon knowing that Cheng Hai merely wanted to train and didn't encounter a wild dungeon. Just then, Shu Mao gives Cheng Hai some tips about being an adventurer. Unbeknownst to our naive MC, Shu Mao's title is literally ignores helpless people. He then explains that he can equip a title into his status window upon entering the dungeons, and he can enjoy the perks that come with it. However, this is visible to other adventurers, so people who specialize in hunting low-ranked dungeons often hide this because it's weird to display. Additionally, if your title is a little too enticing, someone might follow you to locate the entrance of your highly coveted dungeon. Noticing that Cheng Hai is unfazed, Shu Mao concludes that he is nothing but a wimpy author who doesn't know the first thing about being an adventurer. Thankfully, Cheng Hai didn't expose his title, or else Shu Mao would know how long it took him to take a single murloc down. Just then, Shu Mao urges Cheng Hai to return to the gym, as Coach On might be done with his gym contract. Meanwhile, Coach On does some digging on Cheng Hai and finds out he makes good money as an author. His assistant thinks it's unlikely for Cheng Hai to stumble upon a wild dungeon entrance, but he's in a hurry like he's preparing for a raid within a month. Coach On isn't sure about Cheng Hai's true motives, but is interested to see where this leads. He just hopes Cheng Hai won't be shocked when he learns his title, the Newbie Killer. If all goes according to plan, he might just take Cheng Hai's dungeon entrance for himself. Upon arriving at Whale's gym, Coach On says that the contract is ready, and if Cheng Hai finds no issues, he can sign it. Cheng Hai doesn't pay much attention to Coach On's title, which implies that he's unlikely to have encountered a wild dungeon. Coach On asks Shu Mao if he did anything excessive, and the latter replies that he has no reason to. Realizing they can't get anything from Cheng Hai, Coach On ultimately decides to cut this guy some slack. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai signs the contract. The assistant coach tells him to take care of it, and she also shares that Coach On will conduct a physical test on him later. After conducting the test, Coach On concludes that Cheng Hai is indeed a wimp, like we didn't already know. He decides not to do any speed tests for now, and he'd rather focus on Cheng Hai's strength and fitness training. Desperate to improve, Cheng Hai stresses he's free to train anytime. With this, Coach On tells him to report tomorrow at 10 a.m. After getting home, Cheng Hai is disappointed that the largest fitness institution in China tricks newbie adventurers for profit. If his acting skills were bad, then they would kill him on the spot. Whew. So our MC isn't as dumb as we thought. If there's a AAA ranked trainer like Coach On in a small place like Dongshan, imagine what it's like around the world. Wait, if being an adventurer is this risky, then he might just lose his head after ordering that chainmail. His location has been exposed, which heightens the risks. Thankfully, he didn't order his weapon in the same store, so he might get away unscathed. There's too much drama, so Cheng Hai might have to create a different strategy from now on. Later that day, he enters the dungeon for some raiding, and there he finally decides on what he must do. Originally, he was supposed to train more before setting out to complete some missions, but since there are too many traps for newbie adventurers, he might have to level up on his own. He was lucky today for avoiding a trap, but he's not going to be that fortunate all the time. With this, Cheng Hai checks his mission and discovers that he must obtain one pair of Murloc eyes to exit the dungeon. However, upon checking the Murloc's corpse, Cheng Hai discovers that its organs are missing. It must have been eaten by some wild dogs. But hey, at least the eyes are intact, right? If he can just hold his breath and pluck the eyes out, and he won't have to fight for today. Or so he thought. An angry Murloc suddenly appears behind him, ready to pounce. Cheng Hai doesn't understand what this oversized frog is saying, but it must be mad that he killed its companion. Well, it's just one Murloc, and he can easily take it down like he did yesterday. Oh, wait. There are two of them. Cheng Hai immediately runs for his life, knowing he can't take down two Murlocs at once. He barely survived his previous encounter. And so Cheng Hai spends the rest of the day running from the Murlocs. When he finally stops to take a break, the Murloc attempts to attack him. However, Cheng Hai points out that the Murloc got separated from its companion, granting him a crucial advantage. The Murloc screams as Cheng Hai swings his axe, ultimately killing the overgrown frog. However, his triumph is short-lived as another Murloc emerges from the bushes, ready to attack. Unfazed, Cheng Hai merely smirks, ready to go on another killing spree. After a successful raid, Cheng Hai returns home to collect his prize. His rating increased, but the status window didn't reward him with anything, much to his dismay. Is the dungeon's drop rate really this low? If this is the case, then how do adventurers earn money? He must be missing something. So he plans to ask Coach On and Shu Mao about it. However, Cheng Hai is skeptical about that, so he decides to level up first before they think of him as clueless. The next day, Cheng Hai reports to Whale's gym for his workout session. However, the assistant tells him that Coach On and Shu Mao will be away for a few days. Cheng Hai spares no time to lose, and he immediately heads to the VIP room to do some physical training by himself. For the following days, he furiously trains himself, much to Coach On and Shu Mao's surprise. Coach On is shocked that Cheng Hai trained under such intensity. Shu Mao agrees, adding that he might raise his strength and physique to an 11 if he keeps up with this pace. Coach On even believes he can reach a 12 for the foundational attributes if he doesn't get delayed by injury or illness. Just then, Shu Mao asks Coach On if he plans to invite Cheng Hai to join the Whale's Gym Adventurers. He has the potential, based on how rich and motivated he is. If Cheng Hai doesn't face accidents, he can be an average adventurer. However, Coach On discloses that he already offered the opportunity to Cheng Hai, but he refuses because he wants to be an independent adventurer and rely on the black market. Shu Mao is disappointed to hear this, but he shrugs it off and says that everyone has their reasons. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai collapses from exhaustion, completely drained. Shu Mao expresses concern, warning Cheng Hai that he's pushing himself too hard and could end up getting hurt. Cheng Hai responds by stating his goal of becoming an adventurer within a year, explaining that delaying his progress would only increase the cost of training. This makes Shu Mao wonder if Cheng Hai is rushing to make money from the black market. Later on, Cheng Hai and Shu Mao head to a burger joint. Cheng Hai gets preoccupied with his thoughts as he believes that Shu Mao and Coach On see him as a more competent person. Now, he only needs to execute the perfect plan at the perfect time. Shu Mao suddenly joins him, and he's wondering what Cheng Hai is thinking so deeply about. Cheng Hai suddenly snaps out of his thoughts and says that he's just tired. Shu Mao reminds him that he can't overwork himself, as this might increase the risks of injury. Cheng Hai agrees, and he says he plans to lessen his training load soon. He suddenly asks Shu Mao if he's made his money back as an adventurer. Shu Mao replies it's too early, and he'll probably get it once he hits level 11. Cheng Hai slyly asks why it takes so long, so Shu Mao explains. At lower levels, like 1 to 5, the risks are lower, so many people choose this path because it's easier. But at levels 6 to 10, missions get tougher, and knowledge about monsters becomes more valuable. Many adventurers become information gatherers then. Despite the higher risk, they can still survive if they're very careful. At level 11, adventurers can't relax because the challenges become extreme, but the payoff makes it worthwhile. Additionally, Shu Mao explains that gear, items, and skill books, anything aiding in leveling up, come with high price tags. Cheng Hai is puzzled about why adventurers at levels 6 to 10 don't prepare more actively if level 11 dungeons are so dangerous. Shu Mao says there are a few reasons. Firstly, the Adventurers Association doesn't force adventurers to enter dungeons, so many choose to retire and return to a normal life when they hit level 11. He also mentions that only a few adventurers make it to elite dungeons, and compared to levels 11 to 15, which have significant risks and rewards, levels 6 to 10 can help adventurers regain their initial investment, and even make some profit through gathering information and managing logistics, all without risking their lives. With this, it makes sense to Cheng Hai why Shu Mao stayed at level 6 for a long time. When Cheng Hai gets home, he reflects on the wealth of knowledge he's gained through Shu Mao. It finally dawns on him why he couldn't find anything useful on the Adventurer Forum. It appears that people exploit information to make money, and newcomers might even fall victim to deception from other adventurers seeking access to their dungeons. However, Cheng Hai is particularly shocked to learn that he can only receive a reward once despite exiting the dungeon multiple times. It seems unlikely that his dungeon will yield any rewards now. Nevertheless, Cheng Hai resolves to clear it on his own, as he doesn't need the money anyway. Afterward, he plans to pursue a career as an adventurer. With this, Cheng Hai puts on his armor and decides to follow Shu Mao's advice, which is to collect information first. Upon entering the dungeon, Cheng Hai is taken aback to realize that he doesn't have to engage in combat for today's mission. All he needs to do is locate a lake to exit. However, the clearing condition stipulates that he must eliminate a tidal Murloc team, with only 19 days remaining until the dungeon expands. Fortunately, Cheng Hai followed Shu Mao's advice and brought a drone, as finding a lake without it would be impossible. As he pilots the drone, Cheng Hai spots a group of Murlocs accompanied by an orange dragon-like creature. The beast becomes agitated upon sighting the drone, and suddenly leaps into the air, launching an attack against it. Cheng Hai is confused by the appearance of such a creature, uncertain if it's a Murloc, due to its different aura and higher level and combat abilities. He decides to ignore it and focus on finding the lake. A few minutes later, Cheng Hai spots a giant lake, and the presence of numerous Murlocs in the area suddenly makes sense to him. Cheng Hai chuckles, realizing that the mission seems too easy, and then he can finally leave the dungeon. However, the status window suddenly notifies him of a map change and an increase in the dungeon's rating. Cheng Hai is puzzled, but then he trembles in horror as he sees the orange Murloc staring at him with its menacing sharp teeth. The orange Murloc suddenly dashes towards Cheng Hai, slapping the drone's controller out of his hand. If he didn't react so quickly, he would have been badly injured. Poor drone. It was brand new. Cheng Hai is a bit stressed out by his broken drone, but you must focus on the current crisis. He suddenly starts to worry, noticing that the orange murloc is extremely fast with its movements. To make matters worse, the orange murloc suddenly lunges toward Cheng Hai, and blood spurts out everywhere. Blood streams down Cheng Hai's face as he receives a powerful blow from the orange murloc, and the specter of death looms over him. Meanwhile, the orange murloc loses interest in Cheng Hai and delegates him to its underlings. Reflecting on his life choices, Cheng Hai regrets becoming an adventurer, if it meant meeting his end like this. Memories of the stories he used to write flood his mind, and he wonders if he'll share the fate of his long-dead main characters. Suddenly, a strange sense of empowerment washes over Cheng Hai as he realizes he's still an adventurer despite his fear of death. Swiftly seizing his axe, he strikes a nearby murloc without hesitation. Well, that was random. In a moment of desperation, Cheng Hai thinks of a trump card he can use. Luckily, his status window has received a new update that allows him to engage in one-on-one combat with a murloc. Equipping this title, Cheng Hai gains the strength, agility, and instincts of his opponent upon defeating it. This boost enhances his foundational attributes, making him feel lighter and more powerful. Cheng Hai swiftly dispatches the murlocs, cleaving them in half with his axe. He also notices that the murlocs have slowed down, and his vision has improved, a seemingly impossible turn of events that even Cheng Hai finds hard to believe. Meanwhile, the orange murloc is equally puzzled, wondering what Cheng Hai did to suddenly increase his attributes. With determination in his eyes, Cheng Hai strides towards the orange murloc, ready to kill it like he did with its minions. In its own language, the murloc screams at Cheng Hai, warning him not to be arrogant, just because he defeated its underlings. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai grows cautious of his own movements, aware that the weight of his chainmail will slow him down, despite his enhanced attributes. Consequently, he discards his heavy axe and retrieves his spear from one of the dead murlocs. Realizing he must bait the murloc and seize the opportunity to inflict heavy damage, Cheng Hai mentally prepares himself. Anger and excitement intertwine within him as he faces this life-and-death situation. Suddenly, the murloc charges at him, but Cheng Hai thrusts his spear into its mouth. He earns an injury from this attack, and he falls to the ground and bleeds heavily. Meanwhile, the murloc struggles in vain to remove the spear, before succumbing to its injuries. Upon detecting the abnormal murloc's demise, the status window rewards Cheng Hai with a new title, Survival After Death, and grants him the profession of Deathwalker. Additionally, he receives an upgrade item to help resolve his current dilemma. Following the status window's instructions, Cheng Hai places it in his thermos. Equipping the item, Cheng Hai discovers it is a rare recovery potion. Cheng Hai immediately drinks the potion, and he's shocked to see that it immediately healed his injuries. He then summons the status window, and he discovers that his sense attribute unexpectedly increased. Recalling his previous difficulty leaving the dungeon, Cheng Hai investigates the new exit condition. He learns he must survive for 3 minutes while being pursued by strong and abnormal murlocs. Additionally, he must destroy the murloc's hatching pond to clear the mission. However, Cheng Hai feels frustrated and decides to delay the task for another day. However, as he exits the dungeon's entrance, he notices that it has become bigger. He tries putting his hand in, but he's unable to. The status window then informs him that his level is insufficient, disabling him from entering. What? The dungeon upgraded. As Cheng Hai reflects on the situation, he realizes that the exit mission he just completed is actually from a higher level dungeon. No wonder the mission difficulty increased and he received a reward. The status window tells Cheng Hai that his level is insufficient, so it offers him the option to use his Deathwalker profession. As soon as he clicks yes, a dark force suddenly surrounds him, installing the profession in his status window. Cheng Hai is shocked that it boosted his sense attribute, increasing it to 16. With this attribute boosted, he can see every corner of the room with his eyes closed. If it's this good at 16 points, he can't even imagine what it would be like if it reached 20. Cheng Hai then checks out his other titles. He already knows that the one-on-one with a murloc grants him the same attributes as the strongest murloc. However, he hasn't checked out what Survival After Death does. He explores the status window and discovers that it increases his combat abilities and attributes when he's in a near-death experience, which is kind of similar to the Deathwalker one. Later that day, Cheng Hai heads to the whale's gym to work out like crazy. Xu Mao is amazed that a newbie like Cheng Hai can reach a 1-year accomplishment in just 2 months. If someone else were under his training load, they would be in the emergency room. Based on his observations, Xu Mao guesses that his physique is at least 16 or even more. It seems like Coach An missed a good asset. Shu Mao suddenly approaches Cheng Hai, telling him his agility should be up at 12 points already. He adds that his current physique is enough to complete the exit conditions of a dungeon. Just then, Shu Mao reintroduces the prospect of having Cheng Hai join Whale's Gym's adventurers. However, Cheng Hai remains firm, saying he doesn't want to be restrained by contracts. Shu Mao is saddened by his response, saying it would have been a great chance for them to raid dungeons together. However, Cheng Hai reminds him they can still do that as colleagues. He suddenly remembers that he was looking for a place to buy dungeon slots, so Cheng Hai asks Shu Mao where he can purchase one. Shu Mao suggests an unspecialized alliance, which puzzles Cheng Hai. If his memory serves him right, this must be the largest unspecialized group. Shu Mao proceeds to share that if Cheng Hai plans to go to the black market for adventurer slots, that he should choose entrances that are low-ranked, as this guarantees that it is provided by the unspecialized alliance or their own operation. When asked why, Shu Mao explains that typically, transactions involving the sale of adventure slots carry significant risks for both the seller and the buyer. Sellers often fear that experienced adventurers might pose as novices, while buyers worry that sellers may vanish after receiving payment. However, this concern doesn't apply to transactions facilitated by a non-specialized alliance. Despite the higher commission fees associated with such transactions, they ensure that the seller remains in contact with the buyer and can be trusted in deals related to dungeon-related purchases like slots. Upon arriving home, Cheng Hai immediately begins his search for a seller offering slots. Unfortunately, his city doesn't seem to have any available options, so he turns to Yun Xiao City as his best bet. Contacting a seller there, Cheng Hai inquires about slot availability and is informed that they are waiting for 2 more participants to join the raid. Intrigued, Cheng Hai asks about the transaction process. 2 days later, Cheng Hai finds himself in a park in Yun Xiao City. Just then, a buff guy who looks like a knockoff Wolverine approaches him. The seller introduces himself as Old Driver, the alias he goes by. He then informs Cheng Hai that he's the final member to join the team, and once the contract is signed, Old Driver will lead him to the dungeon. He follows Old Driver and finds himself among a group of adventurers and the contractor from the Unspecialized Alliance. The contractor announces that the buyer's final payment will be deposited into a designated account provided by the Alliance. The seller will then assist the buyers in completing the transaction. Once the buyers return from the dungeon, the final payment will be transferred to the seller's account. Emphasizing the importance of safety, the contractor warns buyers not to violate the safety agreements outlined in the contract and advises sellers not to ignore dangerous situations or act violently toward the buyers. Furthermore, he emphasizes that the specific location of the dungeon must remain undisclosed to anyone. After addressing the group, the contractor asks if there are any questions. Adventurers named Liang, Leader, and Hate respond that there are none. With the contract finalized, a magical seal appears on the arms of the adventurers. With his task complete, the contractor takes his leave. Old Driver then instructs everyone to say status window to access their adventurer information and mission details. He reassures the group that the status window is only visible to the owner, so there's no need to worry about their information being exposed. Another adventurer suggests that everyone disclose their exit missions, so they can organize accordingly. However, Cheng Hai realizes that his exit and clearance mission involves a banshee, a creature not typically encountered at the beginner rank. This shocks him, as this dungeon might not be what everyone expects. Cheng Hai theorizes that the current dungeon might have the same bug as the one in his house. According to the Adventurer Forum, if a dungeon has monsters not included in the beginner rank, it could either mean that it's a one-of-a-kind situation, or the adventurers that encountered it all died. We can only wish for the first one. Suddenly, the seals announce that the guy with glasses lied about his exit mission, thereby violating the safety regulations. A man intervenes, saying that someone must have triggered the safety regulations, because the raid hasn't started yet. The guy with glasses defends himself, saying that his exit mission is to collect high-value herbs. He also insists that the dungeon has a bug. Suddenly, a thug adventurer approaches him, enraged that a newbie like him already dares to lie about his exit mission. Before the situation escalates, the leader approaches the thug guy, telling him to cut some slack for the newbie because he's just starting out. The guy with glasses gets on his knees, pleading for another chance. The thug yields, stressing that there won't be any consideration for him next time. After the situation cools down, Old Driver then tells everyone to announce their real exit missions. The guy with glasses admits that his mission is to find the lake's banshee, while one adventurer says he has to hear the banshee's sound. Cheng Hai reports that he has to look at the banshee for 10 seconds, while one adventurer is tasked to find the banshee itself. While taking mental notes, the thug adventurer measures the possible casualties of the mission. Liang asks if the tasks are dangerous, and the thug guy replies that it depends on how they attack. If they do well, then the mission will go smoothly. Just then, the thug faces the lake, playing an alluring song with his harmonica. One adventurer asks what he's doing. An old driver replies that he's summoning the banshee. Curious, the adventurer asks how the thug knew this trick. An old driver merely replies that it's a commercial secret. Suddenly, an ethereal-looking banshee emerges from the water, and she lunges into the air. With this simple occurrence alone, the exit missions of the leader and the guy with glasses get cleared. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai stares at the banshee for 10 seconds, successfully clearing his exit mission as well. Old driver quickly tells everyone to put on their earplugs, as the banshee is about to sing. As the fat adventurer asks what will happen if they don't wear it, Cheng Hai notices that his nose is bleeding. Well, I guess that answers the question. If Cheng Hai didn't wear the earplugs right away, he would have been dead, like he expected. A creature that is not listed in a low-ranked dungeon is dangerous and deadly. Suddenly, the thug stops playing his harmonica, prompting the banshee to return to the water. He then asks the others if their exit missions have been completed. If they are, then they are to return to the way they came from. However, a greedy adventurer refuses to leave the place, saying that he wants to collect some valuable plants and minerals first. He adds that the thug wants them to leave the dungeon right away, so that he can have all those precious items for himself. The greedy adventurer adds that he paid for his slot, so he deserves to collect plants and minerals to get his investment back. Old driver clarifies that this was not stated in the contract, but the greedy adventurer argues that the contract didn't say anything about things they could do after the exit missions are completed. Cheng Hai asks Liang if it's truly possible to collect the said items. Liang is quite surprised that Cheng Hai is unaware of the tactics of adventurers, so he explains that most people can't clear a dungeon, and because of this, they resort to collecting resources and more information for profit. Meanwhile, the thug reminds the greedy adventurer that he can kill him anytime despite this being a violation of the contract. The adventurer is unfazed by his threat, so the thug reveals he didn't sign the contract with them. He suddenly retrieves a weapon from his inventory, preparing for his wicked plans. However, Liang and leader assert their authority, prompting the thug to scoff at what they're about to do. Liang replies that he hates people like him, while leader tries negotiating, saying there's nothing wrong with collecting herbs and minerals. Suddenly, old driver reminds everyone that if the greedy adventurer doesn't make it out of the dungeon alive, he won't receive any payment. However, if he dies while gathering resources, none of them will gain any profit. Leader proposes a solution, suggesting that old driver can provide protection for them, and in return, they'll share a portion of the items with him. This proposal leaves old driver stunned, but he politely declines, stating that he won't take such a risk. Leader wonders if it's truly about avoiding risks or if old driver simply doesn't want the adventurers to uncover the dungeon's secrets. Angered by this statement, old driver accuses leader of not being a newbie, but rather a novice adventurer who has joined the mission to clear it. Suddenly, the thug confronts Liang, his imposing aura radiating from his body. Old driver tries stopping him, revealing that his true name is Lao Liao. Liang is unfazed, telling Lao Liao that he should already know which one of them is stronger, based on the aura they emit. Unexpectedly, Lao Liao abruptly decides to leave the group, declaring that they can have the dungeon to themselves, because he's going home. Funny, only a minute ago, this guy was ready to throw hands. The adventurers quickly regroup, eager to explore and loot the dungeon. Meanwhile, old driver trails after Lao Liao, complaining that the adventurers are foolishly disregarding the contract rules now that they secured the exit mission. Suddenly, Lao Liao tells him to drop the act because they've walked far enough from the group. Old driver chuckles, complimenting Lao Liao's acting skills. He also says he almost believed him when he walked away from Liang, as it implied that he couldn't beat him. However, Lao Liao admits they truly can't beat Liang, but Liang is equally scared of him. Old driver then asks Lao Liao if he believes that the adventurers can clear the dungeon, and the latter replies that it's unlikely. Despite Liang's title being a combat expert, he is no match for the Banshee. While leader is charismatic, he and Liang are only at the 5th level. Lao Liao is sure that they both won't survive against the Banshee, and that only 2 or 3 adventurers will make it out of this dungeon alive. It is then revealed that old driver and Lao Liao have been doing this tactic for quite some time, selling dungeon slots while not caring about the casualties. Back in the dungeon, leader hands out swords to the rest of the adventurers, which they eagerly try out. He then reveals to everyone that he can increase some of their foundation attribute, a prize for their participation in clearing the dungeon. Cheng Hai verifies leader's claim by checking his status window, confirming that his physique has indeed increased by 1 point to 13. Considering leader's straightforward title as team leader, Cheng Hai speculates that it might enhance the team's attributes. Not the most imaginative title, if you ask me. Suddenly, the guy with glasses asks how they're going to summon the banshee without the harmonica. They won't be able to clear the mission if the banshee remains in the lake. Just then, the greedy adventurer from earlier picks up a rock, saying that his title, Provocateur, allows him to force a dialogue and irritate a target. Apparently, that's a thing. The guy adds that the target will lose 2 points from their wisdom attribute and become vengeful and fearless of death. Determined to provoke a response, the adventurer hurls the rock forcefully into the lake, aiming to draw the banshee's attention. The impact disrupts the serene surface of the lake, summoning the banshee. As the banshee emerges, the adventurer boldly extends his middle finger in an attempt to provoke it. This successfully triggers the banshee, causing it to charge towards the team. Li Yelling suddenly intervenes, claiming that he'll take it from here. He then instructs everyone to spread up and let the combat experts control the banshee. He also reminds them to put on their earplugs and spread out around the perimeter. Li An attempts to land a strong blow against the banshee, but it only turns transparent once his fists hit. The team is shocked to see that the banshee merely passed through Li An. In a split second, the banshee appears right in front of the greedy adventurer. Meanwhile, a swarm of banshees converges on the lake, ready to end the adventurers. Meanwhile, Li An lands a strong punch on the irritated banshee, sending it flying into the air. The guy with glasses and hate are relieved to know that they're gaining the upper hand. Finally, they have the chance to leave the dungeon. But psych, the group suddenly notices a glowing red light coming their way, and it seems like trouble. Li An quickly realizes that it's a group of banshees, and the sellers trick them into thinking that the dungeon only has one of these creatures. The banshees inevitably reach the lake, and they swarm the area surrounding the adventurers. The group is defeated, knowing well that they're outnumbered. At this point, the earplugs won't be able to mask the fatality of the banshee's screams. Li An urgently instructs the adventurers to run for their lives. They head into the forest, where the banshees promptly follow. Hate is on the verge of crying, wallowing at the fact that his life is full of bad luck. He remembers Ting and Ziyuan, two people he cared about deeply, and how their tragic fate mirrors his current situation. He recalls a moment of desperation when he pleaded for his life before Gao Changyang, a criminal and seasoned level 7 adventurer. Gao was seated between two motionless women, each adorned with a red string similar to Hate's. Suddenly, Hate snaps back to reality, feeling a surge of courage as he resolves to fight back and seek vengeance for Ting and Ziyuan. And then he dies. Unfortunately for this bad boy, he's not the most skilled fighter. Meanwhile, a fat adventurer desperately waves his sword at the banshees surrounding him, claiming that he's going to be a legendary adventurer. Can't be that when you're dead, my dude. On the other hand, the guy with glasses helplessly cowers on the ground, calling for his mommy. He claims that he shouldn't have cooperated with the president in laundering the company's money. Elsewhere, Li An bravely combats the banshees, but this costs him his sight. Leader also suffered the same fate, his blood dripping from his eye. He's defeated, realizing that they were fooled by the sellers. He theorizes that the dungeon's difficulty is too high. To make matters worse, there's no way out as the banshees are immune to physical attacks and have exceptionally high resistance to fire, lightning, and acid. Cheng Hai asks him if there are any other ways, but Leader hesitates to answer. He finally musters the courage to reveal that there's one way that they can make it out alive. In their last dungeon raid, Li An once obtained a small jar of holy oil blessed by the monks. If they coat whatever weapon with that oil, it can be fatal to the banshees. While Leader discloses this, Li An ultimately falls victim to the banshee's brutality, causing him to spew out blood from his tortured body. Cheng Hai has seen enough suffering for the day, so he promptly activates his survival after death title to clear the dungeon once and for all. He heads over to Li Yang, telling him about Leader's advice and asking for the holy oil. However, Li Yang's eyeballs aren't exactly functional right now, which disables him from controlling the status window and retrieving the holy oil. Li Yang reassures Cheng Hai that he can still get it out. Suddenly, he punches himself in the chest with his glowing fist, claiming that the item will drop out once he dies. Man, this guy is crazy. As soon as Liang dies, his items drop from the inventory, including the holy oil. Cheng Hai is still in disbelief that Liang killed himself to save him, and he can't help but think that he might have misunderstood him. With his powerful titles, Cheng Hai could easily escape the banshees using just his speed. He was simply trying to finish the dungeon and didn't expect Liang to die for him. Nevertheless, he firmly grasps the bottle of holy oil, determined to honor Liang's sacrifice. He pours the oil into his sword, and the banshees immediately surround him. He calls out the noisy creatures, telling them to shut up. Triggered, the banshees immediately rush towards Cheng Hai to end him. With his blessed long sword, equipped with the power to destroy evil creatures, Cheng Hai easily asserts who's boss. Elsewhere, in an abandoned building, a mysterious woman exits the dungeon. Her title equips her with the ability to go into stealth mode. Old Driver senses that someone just exited the dungeon, but Lao Liao sees no one. So he says that Old Driver must have been mistaken. Meanwhile, the woman, who was in the dungeon raid the whole time, knew that the sellers set up a trap for a dungeon that couldn't be raided. They entice adventurers of similar skill levels to attempt a mission they can't complete. These adventurers are sent there under false pretenses only to meet a deadly fate. Old Driver and Lao Liao will then steal their items or kill them if they come out alive. It turns out that this woman has been hired by a client to investigate the death of his son, who allegedly purchased a slot from the sly sellers. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai slices the last banshee in half. He immediately heads to Leader, asking him if he's capable of standing up. Leader replies that he's struggling, as the banshee's screams have severely damaged his internal organs. He then asks if the others have died, and Cheng Hai affirms it, stressing that none of them survived. Leader is disheartened by the news, but he's also surprised by Cheng Hai, as he must have a strong title or profession. Cheng Hai chuckles, saying that Leader should keep that information a secret. However, Leader says that he's the only one around, so it doesn't matter. To ensure that Cheng Hai would spare him, Leader strikes up a deal. He agrees to cooperate with Cheng Hai, promising to keep their secret and share all the rewards from the raid. As a gesture of trust, he mentioned they could consider a one-way contract as a safety precaution. However, Cheng Hai mentions that he can still keep his secret if he kills Leader. Plus, he can save himself from a contract. However, Leader replies that he won't get his mission calculation reward if he does this. The rewards from a high-level dungeon are no joke, so he lets Cheng Hai assess his actions. With his sword pointing at Leader, Cheng Hai remains quiet, seemingly thinking deeply about the proposal. The Leader adds that the sellers likely wait at the dungeon exit, prepared to ambush any survivors. Old Driver and Lao Liao, skilled combatants known as carrion vultures, are formidable adversaries with skills comparable to adventurers. Leader emphasizes that he can act as bait, while Cheng Hai covers the attacks. At this point, taking Leader would be Cheng Hai's best bet. Back at the abandoned building, the dungeon's entrance indicates that someone is about to exit. Lao Liao says that this is what it looks like when someone is coming. Old Driver, on the other hand, accepts that he must have seen wrongly a while ago. Just then, Cheng Hai emerges from the dungeon while assisting Leader. Noticing that the dungeon is collapsing behind them, Old Driver can barely believe that they cleared the dungeon. Suddenly, Cheng Hai drops his pretense of helping the Leader and swiftly lunges toward Old Driver with his long sword, impaling him. Blood gushes from the man's body, leaving Lao Liao in shock. He freezes upon noticing Cheng Hai's title, indicating he possesses the Lone Wolf title. Cheng Hai's eyes glow red with merciless intent, as he tells Lao Liao that he took out the weaker one first. With his new titles, Dance with Death and One Step, One Kill, Cheng Hai is prepared to seek justice for the adventurers who were killed. As Cheng Hai pulls his sword out of Old Driver's lifeless body, he tells Lao Liao that he's stupid for not thinking that their victims will someday seek revenge. Lao Liao immediately equips a new title, Lao Liao, in response, hastily equips a new title, Run, Scary Cat. Boosting his agility by 2 points, brandishing his poisoned dagger, he warns Cheng Hai to keep his distance. Cheng Hai, on the other hand, sarcastically states that he's very scared. Suddenly, the two engage in a frenzied chase, their movements so swift that they blur to the naked eye. Meanwhile, Leader, observing from a corner, senses the intensity of their clash. Despite his experience as a level 5 adventurer, he finds himself outmatched by the speed and ferocity of Cheng Hai and Lao Liao's battle. Speculating that they must be at least level 7 or 8 to move with such agility, he realizes the truth behind the saying that one's potential for greatness is determined long before reaching level 5. It doesn't take long for Lao Liao's luck to run out, and he soon finds himself injured by Cheng Hai's sword. Even with his title, he's still evidently slower than his opponent. Based on Cheng Hai's performance, his agility must be 17 or 18 points. Cheng Hai smirks, telling Lao Liao to take a good guess. Well, someone's getting cocky, for good reason, I guess. Lao Liao suddenly summons his status window, retrieving something from his inventory. He reveals a vial containing a mysterious green substance. He smashes this into the floor, equipping him with a new title, Toxic Carrier. Lao Liao reveals that he was supposed to use this in Liang, but he supposes that Cheng Hai might deserve the beating this time. Out of nowhere, Lao Liao appears in front of Cheng Hai, telling him to feel the mutated spider's poison. He claims to have bought this from the black market at an expensive price. Okay, fun fact, I guess. Cheng Hai struggles to get away from Lao Liao, but the poison inevitably infects him. This makes Lao Liao ecstatic, realizing that Cheng Hai has weaker poison resistance compared to normal people. Just when Lao Liao thinks he has the upper hand, Cheng Hai swings his sword, narrowly missing him. Lao Liao chuckles, claiming that Cheng Hai is too slow for his current title. With the infection spreading to Cheng Hai's eyes and arms, he asks if this is the killing method that Lao Liao arranged for the survivors. Lao Liao confirms this, adding that it's a poison produced at level 7 spider dungeons. It's known to deteriorate a lower-ranked adventurer's strength, speed, and physique. Lao Liao was proud to say that 4 level 5 adventurers have already been killed through this evil method, and Cheng Hai is about to be the 5th one on the list. However, Cheng Hai is unimpressed, saying that this trump card is too simple, and there must be more cunning ways of killing him. This offends Lao Liao. He asserts that he has more tricks up his sleeve. He claims that with his current title, everything in his body is poisonous, including the air he breathes out, his sweat, and even the blood in his veins. The longer Cheng Hai fights against him, the more poison he will be. Lao Liao plans to keep pestering Cheng Hai until he meets his inevitable death. Meanwhile, Leader listens to Lao Liao's dramatic monologues, and he can't help but think that not even Liang can beat this guy. He also theorizes that Cheng Hai will eventually die, if he can end this duel as soon as possible. No wonder Lao Liao was confident in being a carrion vulture. He had this title all along. Unfazed, Cheng Hai merely replies that he overestimated Lao Liao. He summons his status window, and he equips the Dance with Death title, which neutralizes the poison in his body. Cheng Hai swiftly lunges to Lao Liao's position, clashing his long sword into the man's dagger. Lao Liao can't point out where Cheng Hai's sudden surge of speed came from. With a sinister grin, Cheng Hai tells him to take a guess. Suddenly, Cheng Hai slashes Lao Liao with his long sword, causing him to spew out blood. Refusing to surrender, Lao Liao attempts to stab Cheng Hai. However, Cheng Hai only dodges, and he reiterates Lao Liao's words earlier, saying he's too slow. Lao Liao can't believe the power that his opponent possesses. He merely has the Lone Wolf title. How can he be stronger when Lao Liao previously beat level 5 adventurers? Just then, Cheng Hai fatally impales Lao Liao with his sword. Coldly, he remarks that Lao Liao remained confined within his comfort zone, blind to the scenes witnessed by those intimately acquainted with death. Wow, when did Cheng Hai equip the Shakespeare title? Lao Liao surprisingly replies with a long monologue. I'm surprised he can still yap that much. He claims that those drowned are often able to swim, and if one walks with death, you won't get far with it. Only by preying on the weaker adventurer will grant you enough force and resources to compete with consortium and official adventurers before level 10. Firmly, Lao Liao asserts that his path is the right one. Cheng Hai counters that what Lao Liao did was a common approach, but pushing the limits of mortality doesn't always lead beyond death. With resolve, Cheng Hai draws his sword, swiftly ending Lao Liao's life. Oh, finally, that scene was dragging. Meanwhile, Leader can't believe that someone as strong as Lao Liang has been defeated. Suddenly, Cheng Hai gestures for silence, placing his finger to his lips, signaling that Leader should keep the events witnessed a secret. Days later, Cheng Hai finds himself confined in a hospital. As he relaxes in his bed, Shu Mao enters the room with a fruit basket. Cheng Hai asks why he visited, and Shu Mao explains that he heard all about the last raid. He's amazed that Cheng Hai's first dungeon contained a monster that was immune to physical attacks, and when he finally cleared it, he was ambushed by carrion vultures. It's quite a tragic story, but Cheng Hai explains that it's worth it because he gained the survival after death title. Shu Mao agrees, saying that it must be a blessing in disguise. He adds that the legendary adventurers in that raid must have been shocked after facing an opponent stronger than them, considering they're at level 5. Suddenly, Shu Mao reminds Cheng Hai not to carelessly reveal his main title, as this is fatal to adventurers. It turns out that Cheng Hai does not only have to look out for monsters. Cheng Hai scratches his head, embarrassed by his naivety, but also thankful for Shu Mao. Unbeknownst to Cheng Hai, Shu Mao has done a lot of research about what truly happened in the recent raid. Cheng Hai's present title is for group combats, but his skills shouldn't be strong enough to kill Lao Liao, an old driver. This leaves Shu Mao with no other conclusion. Cheng Hai is hiding a much more powerful title. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai summons his status window and removes his title. He notices that Shu Mao is staring at him, so he asks if there's anything in his face. Shu Mao snaps out of his deep thoughts, and he excuses himself to return to the gym. Before leaving, he tells Cheng Hai to report to the gym as soon as he recovers. It's only a matter of time before Cheng Hai's body-shaking plans approach the second phase. As soon as Shu Mao leaves the room, Cheng Hai turns to the empty bed beside him, which Leader used to occupy. A few nights ago, Cheng Hai asked Leader why he was quitting the raid-type adventurer life. Leader explains that the recent incident made him realize that he doesn't have the capability and talent to become a legendary rank adventurer. If he does improve, he knows his full potential will only be around level 11 or 15. However, reaching that is far from possible, and there are great risks. Rather than dying, he'd rather earn money while being at level 6 or 10, which will also secure his retirement in the future. However, it tells Cheng Hai not to do what he's doing, reminding him of his potential to become a legendary adventurer. He does tell him to change his lone wolf habit though. Cheng Hai asks why. So Leader explains that although going solo might boost exit and clearance rates and net more loot, titles, and drops, it's only effective in dungeons up to level 10. Once Cheng Hai hits levels 11 to 15, things get tougher, and brute force won't cut it. Leader insists that to reach legendary adventurer status, Cheng Hai needs a raiding team before hitting level 10. But he also warns that sticking to levels 11 to 15 solo could lead to being ripped off or misled by other adventurers, resulting in significant losses. Now Cheng Hai is left wondering whether he should heed Leader's advice. Elsewhere, the stealth lady from the raid meets up with Cao Hua Wang, her employer. Cao delivers the news that the individuals responsible for his son's death have been dealt with, leaving only 2 survivors from the recent raid. He then presents pictures of the survivors and inquires about their involvement in avenging his son's death. After careful examination, the woman selects Cheng Hai's photo, indicating that he's the one who killed the vultures. Meanwhile, at Yun Shiyao City Hospital's morgue, an unexpected sight unfolds as a dungeon materializes within one of the incinerators. Electricity crackles around the incinerator, and a timer ominously ticks away, signaling that time is running. The following day, Cheng Hai goes on a stroll in the hospital grounds. Suddenly, 2 thugs approach him, and they seem to know his name. One of the thugs, younger brother, asks if he's the guy who cleared the Banshee dungeon, because they're interested in obtaining the clearance reward that he got. He also reassures Cheng Hai that they will pay him for it. However, Cheng Hai nonchalantly crosses his arms, saying he's not interested. Younger brother is pissed by his arrogance, while his partner, older brother, laughs at the fact that Cheng Hai thinks they're in some negotiation. Aren't their names just creative? Suddenly, younger brother sits next to Cheng Hai, demanding that Cheng Hai give him his rewards. He even taunts Cheng Hai, threatening to make him suffer. Suddenly, a nurse screams at the thugs, telling them not to harass her patients. It seems like this woman is known as a threat, because as soon as the brothers see her, they immediately leave. Meanwhile, the nurse tells Cheng Hai to find her if the thugs bother him again. She also reassures him that her big brother is a level 10 adventurer, so the thugs better not mess with her. Cheng Hai bashfully thanks her, but the nurse suddenly gets emotional, saying she should be thanking him. She explains that her friend died in the Banshee Forest and Cheng Hai is to be thanked for clearing the dungeon. Meanwhile, the dungeon in the morgue explodes. This causes a strong surge of electricity to surround the hospital building, signifying an impending crisis. Suddenly, the nurse dissolves right in front of Cheng Hai. He can barely believe it, but it seems like he's witnessing the dungeon rampage phenomenon, where people are randomly pulled into a dungeon. Soon after, he also notices that he's dissolving, and soon after, he teleports into a dungeon. Cheng Hai's eyes widen as he witnesses the scene in front of him. It's a massive graveyard with an exit mission of defeating 100 skeleton soldiers. To clear the mission, he has to survive for an hour. Seriously, give this man a break. The group is surrounded by a million graves, and there's no way to escape. However, the nurse orients the group not to panic. She reckons they were probably pulled into the dungeon, which is most likely beginner ranked. She then instructs the group to open their status windows and confirm their missions. Meanwhile, the brother-in-law of the Adventurers Association entrance manager, Joe Duh, is pissed that he got sucked into the dungeon. He only came to the hospital for a dental checkup and didn't expect to fight for his life. On the other hand, Cheng Hai opens his status window and discovers that they truly have to fight the undead for an hour. He also discovers that it is no beginner-ranked dungeon, but a level 5 survival dungeon. At this rate, the group will be nothing but dead meat. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Association building, entrance manager Shang Li is puzzled to learn that a beginner-ranked dungeon phenomenon has occurred in the hospital. According to reports, 20 people have been pulled into the dungeon. Shang Li rushes to the hospital and seeks updates upon arrival. A worker informs him that they've compiled a list of the missing individuals, revealing that only 3 are adventurers, while the rest are civilians. Additionally, the worker informs Shang Li that they've located the dungeon, but there's bad news. Inside the dungeon, the group compares their exit missions and realizes they all have the same one, except for the thugs, younger brother and older brother, who have different missions. Younger brother explains that it's normal in survival-type dungeons, where exit missions are tailored to the challenger's combat ability. Cheng Hai likely has a different one too. Meanwhile, the civilians panic about what they should do. Cheng Hai then calls everyone's attention, orienting them about the dangers of the dungeon. He also instructs them to arm themselves. With the weapons scattered around the place, he instructs them to team up with a group consisting of 3 to 5 members, and together they must fulfill the exit mission and leave as soon as possible. However, one of the civilians is offended that Cheng Hai is telling them what to do. One guy even introduces the idea that Cheng Hai wants them to leave right away, because he will keep all the loot for himself. Offended, Cheng Hai argues that he's only concerned because the dungeon truly is dangerous. The nurse steps in, asserting that Cheng Hai is a capable adventurer who has successfully cleared a challenging beginner-ranked dungeon. She explains that he has collaborated with other adventurers to combat thugs who exploit beginner-ranked dungeons for evil purposes. The civilians are shocked and impressed by this revelation, with some recalling hearing about Cheng Hai on the news. One person mentions hearing about the thugs who killed others for loot, adding that numerous lives were lost. Amidst the discussion, the nurse advises the group to trust Cheng Hai's judgment. Though some of the stories may be exaggerated, Cheng Hai is relieved that they now understand the potential dangers lurking within these dungeons. Joe Duh suddenly questions their chances of survival, especially since they're just civilians facing a dangerous dungeon filled with hostile skeletons. He points out the difficulty of fighting skeletons, expressing concern that the weaker individuals will be left vulnerable when the stronger ones team up. He rudely asks Cheng Hai if he considers this possibility, causing panic among the group, who now insist on fighting together. Unbeknownst to them, Joe Duh had planned this all along, recalling advice from his brother-in-law to manipulate gullible individuals by giving them a platform to voice their opinions. He intends to use the civilians as leverage to pressure the adventurers into doing his bidding. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai takes a deep breath and assures the nurse to trust him. He instructs her and a child to follow him as he leads them to complete their exit mission. However, Joe Duh frantically questions why they're following Cheng Hai, attempting to sow doubt in his mind by suggesting he should stay behind to save everyone. The group voices their concerns, pressuring Cheng Hai to help them complete their exit missions. To their shock, Cheng Hai reveals that he's not an official adventurer and therefore has no obligation to protect them. He then turns to Joe Duh, threatening him to stop wearing down his morals or he'll break his leg before he exits the dungeon. "Ha, serves you right, you blue-haired parrot." Joe Duh falls to the ground, horrified by the thought of having a broken leg in a dungeon this deadly. As Cheng Hai leaves with the nurse and the child, the group is bewildered by his lack of basic morality to protect the elderly and weak. One person suggests that Cheng Hai's moral standards likely didn't meet the qualifications of an official adventurer. Suddenly, younger and older brother depart from the group, leaving the civilians wondering about their intentions. Younger brother explains that Cheng Hai was correct, as they must survive for an hour. It will only become more challenging over time. He advises the civilians to complete their exit missions before the difficulty level increases. However, deep down, younger brother's true motivation is to escape before Joe Duh corrupts his mind. So he's not as dumb as he looks. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Shang Li is taken aback as he observes the dungeon entrance firsthand. the head of business questions what's wrong with the dungeon, but Shang Li emphasizes that their primary concern should be the number of people exiting before time runs out. Elsewhere, Cheng Hai eliminates a skeleton as a demonstration for the nurse and the child. He then hands a sword to the nurse, telling her to attack the skeleton's neck as it emerges from the grave. Despite her hesitance, the nurse takes the sword. However, she wonders how Cheng Hai can fend for himself without a weapon. He calmly replies that it's no big fuss, as he plans to do a little training using the skeletons. Cheng Hai quickly retrieves an axe from his inventory, ready to do a little workout sesh. Meanwhile, younger and older brothers smash some skeletons to secure their exit mission. As older brother uses his bare fists to deal with the undead, young brother can't help but be bored. He can't stand it anymore, so he tells his brother he wants to swap after this batch of skeletons. On the other hand, Cheng Hai gained a new title, the Undead Killer. This grants him with 2 points on the Undead Charm, while also equipping him with a 2-point boost in damage. After a series of bone chopping, Cheng Hai realizes that some graves are not unlimited. This is good for the civilians, as it implies they can complete the exit mission more easily. However, it poses a challenge for experts like Cheng Hai, whose mission difficulty is higher compared to everyone else's. The curse of being too perfect, am I right? Just then, the nurse informs Cheng Hai that she and the child have cleared the area of skeletons and are moving to another location to hunt down more. Meanwhile, the civilians stick together in a group, with Zhou Da instructing the injured individuals to move to the back, while the rest fend off the skeletons emerging from the graves. He tries to motivate everyone, reminding them they only have 40 minutes left. 10 minutes later, the civilians successfully cleared the area of skeletons. One of them remarks that being an adventurer seems easy, while another suggests Cheng Hai may have exaggerated the dungeon's hostility. Overhearing them, Zhou Da sees in anger. He knows that weak skeletons don't necessarily mean the dungeon's difficulty is low. In fact, weaker skeletons could indicate stronger monsters lurking within. As time passes, the dungeon's difficulty will forcibly increase, from beginner rank to its limit at level 5, the highest standard. Zhou Da checks his status board and grows worried. He realizes the dungeon has fewer resources than expected. Despite fighting for some time, he's only managed to kill 4 skeletons. If the next 10 minutes pass, the dungeon's difficulty will increase, but if the following 10 minutes no new skeletons will emerge, Zhou Da must find a way to defeat 6 skeletons by himself. With 35 minutes remaining, the nurse and the child meet with Cheng Hai to provide an update. The child has successfully completed his exit mission. However, the nurse still needs to eliminate 8 more skeletons, as she has sacrificed all of her chances for the child. With this, Cheng Hai instructs the child to leave first, while he and the nurse continue to hunt down the skeletons. After they finish the mission, they will meet him outside. The child enthusiastically agrees to Cheng Hai's plan. Back at the hospital, Shang Li is shocked to know that no one has cleared this dungeon for the last 10 years. Even veteran adventurers struggle to make it out alive. If that is the case, then Shang Li could only imagine what would happen to the civilians recently sucked into the dungeon. Meanwhile, the head of business wonders how a dungeon like this can exist. She's also baffled by the thought that the adventurer's survival rates are not that high, even if the adventurer is strong. She also wonders why it's called reverse. Shang Li explains that the dungeon operates with an expert grave setting, where all adventurers receive the same exit missions, while the difficulty level for newcomers is 10 times easier. Completing the mission triggers the emergence of a dungeon boss, whose combat abilities far exceed what the adventurers can handle. This boss actively hunts down all within the dungeon, putting even veteran adventurers at risk of dying. Realizing that Zhou Da has been sucked into the dungeon, Shang Li can only hope that he has grasped the harsh reality of their situation. With the race against time to escape the dungeon underway, the stakes couldn't be higher. Meanwhile, the child successfully exits the dungeon. Cheng Hai then assures the nurse that he will assist her in defeating more skeletons, so she can focus on looking after the child. Elsewhere, upon the child's emergence from the dungeon, Shang Li is disappointed to see him instead of Zhou Da. As the dungeon transitions to its second stage, anxiety grips everyone. Aware of what's to come, Zhou Da quickly forms a team with Lu Ming and Wang Ziyang, hoping to increase their chances of survival. Meanwhile, older brother informs younger brother that someone has exited the dungeon, speculating it might be Cheng Hai. However, younger brother doubts this, noting that Cheng Hai is left with 2 responsibilities: the nurse and the child. Being an adventurer, younger brother knows it won't be easy for Cheng Hai to find and defeat 100 skeletons. Suddenly, younger brother notices a glowing figure, observing them from the mountains. His horror mounts as he recognizes Claude, the Death Knight. Claude's strength is so godlike that his rank cannot be determined. Lu Ming and Wang Ziyang follow Zhou Di through the graveyard, unsure of where they're going. Suddenly, Ziyang voices his concerns to Lu Ming, saying that Zhou Di didn't even explain why he wanted them to follow him. On top of that, they are walking far from the others, making them vulnerable if a skeleton army ever appears. However, Lu Ming only shuts him up, insisting that Zhou Di must have his own reason for doing so. Besides, he only called them after the taskbar changed. Zhou Di is their best bet, as he seems to understand the dungeon way more than they do. Just then, Zhou Di stops in his tracks. To the trio's surprise, they see a bunch of skeletons heading towards them, prompting them to prepare for battle. Meanwhile, the other civilians are losing their minds because the three have been gone for so long and still haven't returned. They start thinking that they abandoned them, while some hate Zhou Di for provoking Cheng Hai. They start to worry about what will happen to them, which shouldn't have been the case if only Cheng Hai were here. Just then, a horse rider appears carrying the decapitated heads of younger and older brother. It's none other than Claude, the Death Knight, staring at them with his glowing eyes. Elsewhere, Lu Ming and Zhou Di have left Ziyang to die in the hands of the skeletons. His arm has been cut off and he's been surrounded by the enemy. He can only cry for vengeance as the two try to run away, eager to save themselves. As they escape, Zhou Di asks how many skeletons are left to complete the task, and Zhou Di replies that they need 3 more. Zhou Di then tells him to hurry up and learn from what just happened to Ziyang. Next time, they should only look for small groups of skeleton soldiers to kill, and with that, they should be able to catch up. Suddenly, Ziyang reports that the number of survivors is decreasing by the minute, as if something is happening at the camp. Hearing this, Zhou Di immediately looks in the direction where the camp is located. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai and the nurse fight off skeletons back to back. While defending herself, the nurse asks Cheng Hai about what the second phase means, and he replies that the difficulty might increase, or stronger monsters might appear. However, he tells him not to worry about it, emphasizing that she must focus on progressing her escape mission. Just then, she checks her control panel, and she's shocked to see that everyone else is dead. There are only 4 survivors left. Back at the camp, Claude stands before the bloody corpses that he just killed. He then looks towards the horizon and figures out that there are 2 survivors on the left and 2 on the right. He immediately summons his horse, and he heads to the left first. Meanwhile, Zhou Di realizes that the boss of this dungeon just appeared. If they want to survive, they have to turn back and see if they can find their previous escape route near the boss. However, Ziyang thinks this is a stupid idea, because there's no way that they can escape the mission under the siege of so many skeleton soldiers. Even when there were 3 of them, it was still a challenge. Zhou Di spits back, arguing that they don't have time to look for small groups of skeleton soldiers anymore. As the two argue, Claude appears from the horizon, ready to slash them to pieces. They literally invited their own death because of all that yapping. While Claude advances, he's relieved to know that he only has to kill 2 more people on the right. Just then, in a split second, Ziyang's head comes flying into the air, decapitated by Claude. He tried asking Zhou Di for help, but didn't even get to finish his sentence. Elsewhere, Cheng Hai waits for the nurse to complete her exit mission. Finally, she kills her last skeleton, and she immediately notifies Cheng Hai of this. Cheng Hai then tells her to leave the long sword and go first. However, his eyes widen in horror when he sees the figure behind the nurse. It's Claude. He screams at her to get down while simultaneously activating the professional skill, Dance with Death. Just before Claude can slice off the nurse's head, Cheng Hai counters his sword with the poisoned dagger. Claude is surprised that a mere human is fast enough for his attacks, while Cheng Hai is also shocked to witness Claude up close. The intense encounter caused Cheng Hai's dagger to explode, sending him and the nurse flying from the impact. Suddenly, multiple notifications appear before Cheng Hai, warning him that he is encountering a boss-level monster. In an attempt to give Cheng Hai the best shot at winning, his system aids him by activating various skills and titles. When all of this is completed, the system wishes him luck. Before fighting Claude, Cheng Hai commands the nurse to exit the dungeon, telling her that her presence will only be a hindrance to him. Realizing the urgency of the situation, the nurse complies with what Cheng Hai says. However, she tells him that she'll wait for him outside, and that he must survive. Shortly after, the nurse exits the dungeon, much to the kid's delight. A woman immediately assists her, asking if there are any more survivors inside. The nurse says yes, and she can't help but worry about Cheng Hai. Back in the dungeon, Cheng Hai and Claude exchange rapid strikes, locking each other's attacks. Claude swings his spear from above, and Cheng Hai curses under his breath as he blocks the blow aimed at his neck, gripping his sword with one hand on the hilt and the other on the blade. He realizes he can't keep this up. Claude's strength and speed far outmatch his own. Even if he could predict Claude's next move, exhaustion would soon overcome him. Just then, Cheng Hai watches in disbelief as Claude randomly moves his weapon away from his sword. Out of nowhere, Claude swings his spear again, and Cheng Hai knows he can't dodge or block it. The spear strikes his side, sending him flying backward. Suddenly, Claude chuckles, and then he telepathically says that he's amused by Cheng Hai because he managed to survive until now. Bloodied and struggling, Cheng Hai looks up at Claude, surprised that he's hearing him in his thoughts. As Claude walks up to him, Cheng Hai thinks about what he should do to survive this invincible boss. Meanwhile, Shan Li looks at his timer and finds that it's over 5 minutes. The frown in his face, he suddenly exclaims that it's over. He then commands the woman to summarize the situation and send it to her colleagues in Zhangzhou. He also tells her to report that there were 17 ordinary citizens involved in the underground rampage incident at Yunxiao City Hospital, with only 2 survivors. He also adds that 3 low-level adventurers were involved, but none survived. The nurse gets alarmed when she hears this, claiming that it's too early to give up on Cheng Hai. However, Shang Li only tells them not to indulge in unrealistic fantasies. Shang Li then shares that the boss in the dungeon corresponding to this entrance is unbeatable, even if a level 9 adventurer like him goes off to face it. He claims that Cheng Hai won't hold out for 5 minutes, even if he's a competent adventurer. It's already been 5 minutes since the nurse came out, and he still hasn't left the dungeon. This can only mean that he's dead. The nurse kneels on the floor as she breaks down in tears, blaming herself for Cheng Hai's death. She claims that he would have still been alive if they didn't slow down his progress. At least she's self-aware. Meanwhile, Shang Li looks at them with anger, thinking that Zhou Di would have cleared the dungeon and made it out alive if it weren't for these 2 and that nosy adventurer. Just then, Shang Li takes his leave, saying that he'll go out for a smoke. Before leaving, he tells the man and the woman to handle the registration for the nurse and the kid. The woman suddenly asks what they should do with the entrance. With a cigarette in between his lips, Shang Li explains that the entrance will close within half an hour, and then randomly appear somewhere else in the world. This is what happens when a low-level survival-type entrance goes out of control, randomly pulling people into the dungeon. For this type of dungeon, the handling method is clearly stated in the association's internal manual. First, complete the survivor registration work, and secondly, leave the rest unattended. Before ultimately leaving, Shang Li tells them to keep an eye out until the end, if this really concerns them. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Claude has pierced Cheng Hai in the chest. He tells the injured Cheng Hai that he passed, and then he tosses him into the ground. He leaves Cheng Hai on the verge of death, saying that he looks forward to seeing how he would perform as an undead. Suddenly, Claude raises his spear, now filled with dark purple energy, and transforms it into a giant sword. Turning around, he opens a purple portal and enters it with his horse. You might think our MC is dead, but he has a few tricks up his sleeve. Cheng Hai knows that he won the bet, and that his plan has worked. His body is valuable to Claude, and he needs to use the gift of Death's Dominion before he resurrects as an undead. As his eyes begin to close, a blue dialogue box notifies him that he has triggered the conditions for the "even the undead cannot kill me" gift. With this, the death saving throw commences, healing Cheng Hai's injuries. Meanwhile, in a dungeon of an unknown level called the Undead Kingdom of the Great Skeleton Lord, Claude emerges from a portal. He suddenly tenses as a dark purple star flies toward him. Just then, a knockoff version of Kaneki lands in front of him. This guy is the Dark Knight Messenger, a level 16 legendary creature. He wonders why Claude is here when the Great Lord sent him to recruit at the graveyard. The Dark Knight is also surprised because he came to the dungeon on his own, making him think that someone activated the dinner invitation sent out by the Great Lord. Suddenly, Claude explains that he found a newcomer adventurer who is qualified to become their colleague. He claims that it would be a waste for this newbie to start as a skeleton. Because of this, Claude plans to ask the Great Lord for the crown of the Black Knight and convert him into a reserve Black Knight. The Dark Knight scratches his head in confusion, recalling that the maximum admission level for the graveyard should at least be a level 5. At this stage, new adventurers haven't even found the most suitable profession or title for themselves, leading him to wonder if Claude has given the right judgment to this newbie. Hearing the Dark Knight's doubts, Claude frowns in anger. Back in the graveyard, Cheng Hai props himself up with a hand on his chest and acknowledges that it is incredibly risky. He realizes that if Claude hadn't left on his own initiative, even with the extra life, he wouldn't have had a chance. He then pays attention to the dialogue boxes, noting that the special condition was met, yet there is no exit window from the dungeon. Frowning, he understands that without completing the skeleton quest, he can't get out. Taking out his sword, he urges himself to hurry up before Claude realizes he is still alive. Half an hour later, the nurse and the boy watch the entrance to the dungeon. The nurse shouts that the entrance is not closed, which means Cheng Hai is still fighting and alive. Hearing this, the girl heads out to find Shang Li and inform him of the matter. Meanwhile, Shang Li sits on the stairs while smoking a cigarette, thinking that Zhou Di's sister will definitely blame him for Zhou Di's death. Just then, the girl calls to him from the stairs above, and he looks at her with an annoyed reaction. She then shouts that the dungeon entrance still hasn't closed, even though the time is long past, making Shang Li shocked. Back in the graveyard, Cheng Hai stands surrounded by the bones of fallen skeletons. He opens the adventure panel, and a notification informs him that transactions are higher than single-function ones. He consolidates the settlement, prompting a yellow dialogue box to appear. It states that the settlement has been completed. Despite being at level 4, you managed to survive in the hands of a legendary Claude. Even though his gift played a huge role, it does not detract from his merits, which means he is on his way to becoming a legend. With this, he receives new titles which are Miracle Survivor, Chosen by Legends, Adaptation with Flesh, and Excessive Slaughter. He also has new professions, which are the Trial Badge of the Brave Knight, and an exclusive skill called Fiend Death of the Deathwalker. On top of that, he also obtained the following: a special dungeon invitation for the Grand Banquet of the Great Lord Skeleton, the Undead Slayer Rare Upgrade Voucher, the Contaminated Sword, a rare grade artifact, and the Nightmare Flute. Oh, we're not done yet. He also obtained the Knight's Helmet of the epic Undead Lord Claude. That's a lot for someone who used a cheat code. Seeing this, Claude rubs his chin and notes that the boss's name is Claude, a legendary level boss. Cheng Hai recalls that creatures of this level are usually found in corresponding dungeons, and wonders where such a boss would come from in a 5th level graveyard. He remarks that Claude is incredibly strong, making him wonder if anyone has passed this dungeon before, other than cheaters like him. Just then, he presses the button, confirming his desire to leave the dungeon. Meanwhile, Shang Li looks at the dungeon entrance in surprise. Suddenly, the girl points at it and asks if low-level dungeons continue to exist, even after there are no survivors left. Shang Li replies with a tense face that there are 2 options. First, an adventurer involved in the dungeon completed the main task, but not the escape task. And second, the dungeon evolved. Hearing this, the nurse shouts that's probably the first option, and the boy agrees. However, Shang Li replies that it's impossible because the graveyard has long been defined by the World Adventure Association as practically impossible to pass. He believes that something inside the dungeon itself has somehow affected it, changing its characteristics. Hearing Shang Li's doubts, the nurse and the boy can do nothing but be pissed. Suddenly, the entrance to the dungeon begins to glow, and the boy happily shouts that someone is coming out. To their surprise, Cheng Hai walks out of the portal, making the nurse tear up in joy. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai scratches his head in embarrassment, noticing that people are waiting for him to return. Although everyone is happy to see him alive, Cheng Hai is sweating in anger because he actually cleared the graveyard. Meanwhile, the nurse, with a worried face, tells Cheng Hai that they were worried to death about him, and that if he didn't manage to get out of the dungeon because of her, she would feel guilty for the rest of her life. Cheng Hai only scratches his head, saying that it wasn't that bad. Yeah, like he weren't minutes away from becoming part of the Walking Dead. In the castle of the Great Lord Skeleton, which sounds so lame, a dark figure sits on a throne before Claude. The figure says this is Claude's first time to visit him, ever since he took up residence in the graveyard. The Great Lord Skeleton, which literally is a skeleton, smiles at Claude with his glowing red eyes. In a meeting room, Cheng Hai sits before Shang Li and the clerk of the association's secretary, who is recording the conversation between Shang Li and Cheng Hai. With a smile, Shang Li asks Cheng Hai if he knows that he is the first adventurer in the world to clear the graveyard. Hearing this, Cheng Hai points at himself with an awkward smile. unable to believe that he actually did that amazing feat. Cheng Hai confirms that everything is correct, and although the dungeon level is not very high, this location is well known in the adventurer circle. He says that Cheng Hai's achievement will surely attract a lot of attention from the capital and independent guilds, including the official ones. Cheng Hai knows where this is headed, so he asks Cheng Hai if this will lead them to the recruitment phase. Slamming a stack of papers on the table with a fake smile, Cheng Hai affirms and says that Cheng Hai's performance in the graveyard and Witch's Forest proves his potential, with no more than 10 such talented newcomers in Fujian province. Just then, Cheng Hai grins ominously, stating that as the person in charge, he simply can't miss out. In the hallway, the boy and the nurse wait for Cheng Hai. The boy asks the nurse why Cheng Hai hasn't come out yet. Then he speculates that Cheng Hai might snatch Cheng Hai's clearance reward. This would be the only possible reason why he wanted to talk with Cheng Hai privately. Reflecting on what the boy is saying, the nurse reckons that he might be right. Just then, Cheng Hai appears behind the boy, saying that he wouldn't be so shameless if he were him. He bluntly clarifies that he's not interested in the drops from a level 5 dungeon. However, the boy is not scared of him, and he retorts that it's hard to say because his family might want it, even if he doesn't. Cheng Hai's facial nerves pulsate in anger, but Cheng Hai suddenly intervenes to ease the tension. He ruffles the boy's hair, smiling as he tells him not to talk nonsense. He then explains that he was delayed because they were discussing his joining the Adventurers Association. The boy frowns, asking if he really wants to work for the state. Cheng Hai smiles awkwardly, hinting that the boy must have some issues with the Adventurer Association. The boy explains that a strong man like Cheng Hai could set up his own guild, instead of being constrained by the rules and regulations of the association. Suddenly, Cheng Hai asks who Wang Zijian is, and the boy replies that he's the main character in the Undying Adventurer book. Pissed, Cheng Hai asks what's the connection between being an adventurer and reading a book. As the two bicker, Cheng Hai wonders if he should reveal that he wrote the book. Later in a restaurant, Cheng Hai takes advantage of the opportunity to brag about being the author of the Undying Adventurer. The boy is impressed, unable to believe that he's meeting the author of a renowned book. Cheng Hai only repositions his eyeglasses like a pro, saying that he can show him the manuscript of the second book if he has doubts. Just then, Cheng Hai notices that the nurse isn't eating her food, and she seems like she's on the verge of tears. Suddenly, she pleads with him not to join the Adventurers Association. Cheng Hai asks why, so she explains that her brother and his friends once mentioned that most of the freelancers who joined the association after becoming adventurers regretted it. Cheng Hai asks if her brother mentioned the reason behind this, but the nurse says no. However, she does remember the expression on their faces during the conversation. Joining the Adventurers Association seemed like a terrifying thing for them. After hearing her sentiments, Cheng Hai pauses for a bit, thinking carefully about what he should do. He then looks up at the nurse, telling her that he will assess the situation. Cheng Hai thanks her for the concern, but the nurse argues that she should be thanking him instead. Elsewhere, a cup shatters on the floor as a red-haired woman in an expensive coat points her finger at Cheng Hai, calling him a murderer. She claims that he just let Cheng Hai into the association, even though he's one of the reasons that her husband died. With a furious look on her face, she reminds Cheng Hai about how he rose into position, hinting that her family should be credited for it. This woman is none other than Zhou Chang, the granddaughter of the late legendary adventurer, Zhou Jianming. Seemingly keeping his composure, Cheng Hai looks at her and clarifies that he hasn't forgotten. He explains he invited Cheng Hai to join them because the dungeon he cleared was special and his name will soon be known to everyone. If he accepts their competitor's offer, it will complicate matters. Cheng Hai tells Zhou Chang that if Cheng Hai becomes an official adventurer and reaches the level 15 threshold, his future will be quite predictable. Zhou Chang argues that it's too long, and besides, he only has potential. This doesn't guarantee that he'll cross the level 15 threshold to become a legendary adventurer. With this, Zhou Chang demands to have Cheng Hai killed. With a sigh, Cheng Hai stubs out his cigarette and complies, adding that they'll have to use indirect means. Meanwhile, in a dark apartment, a guy with long disheveled hair sits at a computer, reading a message offering valuable information about the cemetery. Old Huan, a dungeon-related information trader and hacker, raises an eyebrow as he reads this, asking aloud if the information about this place isn't already known. He replies to an anonymous account demanding information that he doesn't already know. The account then replies that someone cleared out the cemetery a couple of hours ago. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai, sitting at his laptop, calmly turns to Joe Chan and says that the job is considered done. Joe Chan leans over the laptop, still furious, and asks if he is sure. Shan Li smirks, explaining that while the reward for completing a level 5 dungeon might seem insignificant to experienced adventurers, for those at levels 6 to 10, especially wanted criminals, who struggle to access dungeon resources and supplies, this information is valuable. He says it's normal in adventurer circles to use such guys to search for dungeon information. Shan Li plans to leak information about Cheng Hai on the black market, drawing adventurers from nearby provinces to go and kill him for his loot. Just then, Old Huang replies, saying that he can provide equivalent value intel or 15 units of comprehensive black market data. Shan Li responds, saying he'll send the personal information of the clearers. In a cinema hall, level 7 adventurer Gao Chengyang, a wanted A-level criminal, smiles as he looks at his phone. There, he reads a message about a newbie adventurer who cleared a level 5 dungeon that no one had ever passed before. The message also declares a condition of 50%. Elsewhere, Cheng Hai asks over the phone if his personal data will be entered into the official system within 3 days. On the other end of the call is Shan Li, asking if he is from Dongshan. Considering that it's a bit far, he offers to arrange temporary accommodation for Cheng Hai, so he doesn't have to run around for the next few days. However, Cheng Hai refuses, explaining that he has business to tend to in Dongshan and will be back in Yunxiyao in 3 days. While listening to him, the nurse looks worried, while the boy raises an eyebrow. Meanwhile, Shang Li says they will see each other in 3 days. As he hangs up the call, he thinks about Cheng Hai being dead before they can even meet again. The next day in Dongshan City, Cheng Hai stands in his house and notices that the dungeon entrance has become noticeably wider. He approaches the entrance and tries putting his hand inside, but a bolt of energy flicks it away. A red dialogue box suddenly appears, stating he can't enter the dungeon if his level is lower than 6. Seeing this, Cheng Hai thinks that the dungeon is now only available for adventurers from levels 6 to 10. He judges he is currently at level 5 and needs to complete 1 or 2 more level 5 dungeons to advance to the 6th level. He then takes a seat and flips through his phone, remembering that there is a level 5 dungeon in Dongshan, where people are recruited. Luckily, it's still available, much to Cheng Hai's joy. The phone screen displays a recruitment ad for adventurers to help with a level 5 dungeon, Goblin Cave. Cheng Hai immediately types a question about the recruitment conditions, and the chat person replies that they need someone with experience in clearing level 5 dungeons. He also needs a combat role or command title, and he needs to sign a temporary contract as well. Additionally, he has to pay 1-3 black market coins as an entrance fee. Cheng Hai quickly asks Xu Mao about the black market coins, which makes him wonder what prompted him to ask about it. Cheng Hai replies that he found adventurers on forums who don't use cash, which made him curious about the black market coins. Hearing this, Xu Mao explains that black market coins are commonly used by adventurers in trading as well, aside from using them as entrance fees. Just then, Cheng Hai asks what makes them special, and why do some adventurers refuse to use cash. Xu Mao explains that the coins are common in dungeons that are level 10 and above. He claims to have asked Coach On about it before, and he said that those things are quite valuable after level 10. However, he didn't go into details about what they're specifically used for. Suddenly, Cheng Hai asks where adventurers below level 10 get these coins, as he's interested in getting some. Xu Mao replies that he can try selling unwanted loot items at the black market. If he wants, Xu Mao can take him to the ghost market in Dongshan later that night. This delights Cheng Hai, and he immediately agrees to meet up. And so later that night, Xu Mao and Cheng Hai walk through the streets of the ghost market. Xu Mao explains the ghost market is open from 2 to 4 in the morning every Monday, with many people but few adventurers. Most vendors often sell things of questionable authenticity, so adventurers can easily become victims of those scams. Xu Mao chuckles and agrees, then raises his hand in farewell, telling Cheng Hai to ask prices first before making deals. He has business to attend to, so he can't stay to accompany him for a stroll. Cheng Hai nods and watches him walk away, thinking that he's quite nice despite his personal agendas. With all the time in his hands, he immediately gets to work and explores the ghost market. He takes a good look at the items in the area, but none of them seem to be compatible for him. Suddenly, Cheng Hai notices a man with a signage saying that he's looking to buy drops from low-level dungeons with succubi as the main theme. He prioritizes items that can summon succubi and deal damage to them. Judging by what he's looking for, Cheng Hai reckons that this man might be trying to tackle Succubus Forest, Noticing that he's looking at the signage, the man asks if Cheng Hai has what he's looking for, which is a flute that summons succubi, and a sword anointed with holy oil. Cheng Hai proudly claims that he has them, then immediately proceeds to ask for the price he's offering. The man smirks, demanding to see the items first. It's easy to talk about the price if the goods are in great condition. However, Cheng Hai suddenly turns around, saying that the man will have to wait for half an hour because he has to go home and get them. The man tells him to hurry, because if someone else sells him what he wants during this time, he won't be buying from him anymore. Not long after, Cheng Hai returns with the sword and the flute. The man observes the flute, and he confirms that it can indeed attract succubi. He likes the item, so he offers Cheng Hai 6 black market coins. As for the sword, he's a little skeptical, so Cheng Hai does a little mansplaining. He claims that it has the sanctified attribute, deals +2 damage against evil creatures, and grants immunity to physical damage from succubi. This impresses the man, so he offers 8 black market coins for it. The man quickly urges Cheng Hai to exchange casualties with him, claiming that it will be easier to trade in the future. Cheng Hai agrees, and then he walks away with the coins. Unbeknownst to him, that seller is Gao Chengyang, a level 7 adventurer and an A-level wanted criminal. Cheng Hai's survival skills just left the room. A few days later in a park, a man's watch reads 10:57 a.m. The man comments that it's been over an hour and wonders why Home is Everywhere hasn't shown up yet. Deciding not to wait, the man in the blue sweatshirt claps his hands and introduces himself as the owner of the 5th level dungeon, Goblin Dungeon. He points to his left and introduces Ms. Lean, an adventurer from the association. He reassures the audience that their strategy for this run has been registered with the authorities, so there's no need to worry about vultures. Ms. Lean stands with her hand raised at face level, backing up the man's claims. Next, the man introduces 3 other adventurers, claiming that they teamed up with him 3 times in the past. He claims they are experienced and reliable players in terms of both skills and character. After that, the man introduces Mr. Wang, the operator of Dongshan Real Estate, and the investor for this operation. Lastly, the man introduces the newbies, Cheng Hai, and a mysterious girl. Cheng Hai goes by the name The Writing Lover from Dongshan, lame, and the girl goes by the name Today is also very lazy. Both their adventurer levels are above level 3, so they are qualified for support work. Cheng Hai tries to look excited, but he's actually starting to gain trauma from all these park meetups. The man with the blue sweater calls them to follow him to the Goblin Dungeon's entrance, suggesting they get water and something to eat for the long road ahead. Meanwhile, Yao Chengyang, the criminal who's following Cheng Hai, hides behind everyone. He's actually Home is Everywhere, and he joined the dungeon raid. With a crazy smile, he says that he guessed it right. Cheng Hai doesn't use the black market coins he earns. He guesses that he used it to exchange strategy tickets for low-level dungeons in Dongshan. Later on, the adventurers walk through the forest. Wang asks the man with the blue sweater how far they still have to go, and he replies that it's not far now, and the entrance is just ahead. The man with the bandana asks C, the guy in the sweater, about how he found the entrance, since it's so remote. C explains it wasn't him who found it, but a local hiker who then sold it to him. The man with the bandana asks if people are still foolish enough to trade a dungeon entrance for money instead of clearing it out. C explains that the Goblin Cave is quite challenging for beginners. Initially, several hikers discovered the entrance, but only one survived the mission and made it out alive. Given that they already have adventurer status, it made sense for them to sell off the dungeon. They couldn't explore within the open period. This way, they could obtain valuable dungeon drops they could currently use and distribute the remaining money to the families of their fallen companions. It seems quite reasonable. However, the man seems to think otherwise. It may be reasonable, but he doesn't think things are as simple as what C, or the person who sold him the dungeon entrance, said. This makes C piss, as he has worked with the bandana guy several times and he still doubts him. Suddenly, Ms. Lean announces to the group that they have arrived at the dungeon entrance. She opens up her guidebook and observes the dungeon, saying that the shape, color, and size of it is completely identical to the level 5 forest terrain dungeon's entrance. Just then, she announces to everyone that the risk assessment has been completed, which means they can enter it now. Hearing this, C tells the bandana guy that he can chill now, knowing that everything is done under Ms. Lean's authority. With this, everyone starts entering the dungeon one by one. However, just before Cheng Hai and Lazy Girl can enter, C reminds them that they are responsible for the goblins once they are inside. He also tells Cheng Hai that he's responsible for Mr. Wang, as he's the reason that his tickets are cheap. Is this guy just tagging along for funsies? Mr. Wang chuckles, saying that he'll leave his 200-pound belly in his care. Suddenly, Lazy Girl asks about the departure task, wondering if everyone has the same main task. What if her departure task is to hunt goblins? I guess you're gonna have to die then. However, C reassures her that if that's the case, they'll prioritize her departure task first and then focus on the completion of the dungeon later. Noting that she has no objections, Lazy Girl enters the dungeon. Cheng Hai follows, and he soon finds everyone already tinkering with their systems inside the dungeon. The man with the bandana asks the men in the jacket and sweater about their departure tasks. They reply that their task was to kill 2 goblins. The bandana guy tells them that everyone seems to have similar tasks, differing only in quantity. Meanwhile, C explains to Mr. Wang that the departure tasks in this dungeon are assigned based on the adventurer's levels. Generally, the departure task for newcomers is to find the goblin dungeon. Adventurers of level 2 to 3 are tasked with entering the dungeon, while levels 4 to 5 are tasked with hunting a certain amount of goblins. This makes sense to Wang, and he realizes why the girl's task is different from the others. Suddenly, Steve claps his hands and asks everyone to listen. Smiling, he says that since the newbies will protect Mr. Wang while facing the goblins, they should complete their missions first. When Ms. Lean and the men from the blindfolded man's company agree, Steve finally announces that they can start. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai stares at the adventurers panel in surprise. It says that his departure task is to engage with the goblin warrior, while his completion requirement is to participate in the killing of the goblin warrior. 2 hours later, everyone starts killing some goblins according to their tasks. The blindfolded man, pressing a goblin into a rock, asks Cheng Hai if he wants to kill it, but he only smiles awkwardly and declines. Meanwhile, Mr. Wang is surprised that these measly goblins are the monsters in a level 5 dungeon. They don't seem very strong for him. Easy to say that when you have a bodyguard. Suddenly, the bandana guy explains that these are ordinary mobs, and the toughest bosses are probably hidden in the dungeon's depths. He says it usually takes 3 to 5 veterans to defeat the boss in the dungeon, and normal goblins aren't a problem, unless their numbers exceed the limit. With a shocked look, Wang says he understands. Later on, the team heads deeper into the dungeon, where they find a cave. Wang asks if they can handle 2 or more goblin warriors, and C replies that it's definitely not something they can do. However, they only typically encounter 1 goblin warrior in a goblin tribe. As of now, only 1 team of adventurers worldwide has encountered twin goblin warriors, but it's highly unlikely for them to come across such a rare event. Wang smiles awkwardly, trying to make it look like he's not freaking out. Meanwhile, hidden deep in the cave lies the warrior goblin, a level 5 beast. Behind it is another ominous figure, its nature and level unknown. A horde of goblins, armed to the teeth with swords and clubs, charges towards the group. Bandana Guy is wielding a long-handled mace, while the man in the jacket, brass knuckles gleaming, prepares for the onslaught. The other guy also assists them in fighting the goblins. While observing them, Ms. Lean suddenly exclaims that something is off, and C asks her what she means. She explains that they have already faced 4 waves of goblins since entering the crypt, and they haven't even ventured deep yet. This number of mobs is unusually high. As the men fend off the goblins with skill and determination, Ms. Lean tensely suggests they might have stumbled upon something big. Meanwhile, Lazy Girl turns to Wang, who is wiping sweat from his face, and questions why he wants to be an adventurer when he has so much money. She suggests he could simply sponsor other adventurers if he doesn't want to miss out on any dungeon. Just then, Wang smiles awkwardly and admits his main goal is to lose weight. Why did I see that coming? The girl is taken aback, her eyes almost popping out of her sockets. She asks what losing weight has to do with being an adventurer. Wang explains that adventuring includes meditation practices that make one stronger and leaner without physical effort, the perfect weight loss method for those with money, but no time for exercise. The girl's face turns blue with shock as she remarks that the rich are indeed hard to understand. Suddenly, Cheng Hai appears and asks what they're discussing. Smiling awkwardly, he asks if he can join them. Wang's eyes twinkle when he sees Cheng Hai's chainmail suit and praises him as a true professional. Meanwhile, the girl is cringing at the wardrobe upgrade and asks why he wasn't dressed like it when he entered the dungeon. Stretching his arms, Cheng Hai shares that without the chainmail, he would have died already. He even wonders why others aren't dressed like him. The girl can only look at him without comments, clearly experiencing second-hand embarrassment. Wiping sweat from his brow, Bandana Guy announces they are done, surrounded by goblin corpses. He turns to Ms. Lean and C, stating it's time to switch, as the next wave of goblins will soon be upon them. C smiles, flexes his fists, and declares it's their turn. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai is shocked when he hears about a rating system. The girl looks down at him and explains that using less external equipment in the dungeon earns more points, which then gives the adventurer higher settlements received after completing the task. All this time, he was sporting that chainmail outfit for lesser points. Lazy Girl suddenly doubts his rank, equipment, and skills, considering him no better than a beginner. Except for higher basic attributes and levels, she thinks Cheng Hai is extremely weak. Nervously, Cheng Hai tries to correct her, but she continues talking, saying that the wild team is clearly unreliable because they have two news to protect. Suddenly, Bandana Guy interrupts, saying they can chat later. He waves them forward, announcing that the goblin squad blocking their path has been destroyed, so they can continue forward. 10 minutes later, they reach 3 tunnels. She asks why there are 3 forks, when there should be 2 in a level 5 dungeon. Suddenly, Ms. Ling confirms her fears from earlier. They have encountered a bug. She explains that this information is confidential, but on average, every 50 low-level dungeons will have a situation that is actually more challenging than, or even far higher than the current level, which is a special case. This is also known as a bug. There are 3 possible bugs: increasing monsters, increasing bosses, or increasing boss strength. Holding up 3 fingers, she suggests it's likely the first option. As Cheng Hai listens, he thinks that this is all too familiar, as the dungeons he entered in the past had some issues too. Wang anxiously asks if continuing means facing more goblins, and Ms. Lean confirms this. Hearing this, he says it sounds too dangerous, so they should probably head back. Besides, he's a self-proclaimed adventurer now. Suddenly, C intervenes, saying they can't go back. He explains that while the number of goblins in the dungeon increased, the boss strength hasn't changed. Their mission isn't to eliminate all the goblins, but to defeat the boss. If they do this before the other goblins find out, they should be just fine. This actually doesn't make it all different from a normal clear, if they act quick. However, Lazy Girl points out that C is only assuming that the boss's strength didn't change. If it's significantly increased, it won't be easy to defeat. If reinforcements for the boss arrive, they could end up being dragged to death in this dungeon. C, displeased, asks if she's suggesting they give up and miss the chance to clear the dungeon. He tells her that if she isn't ready to take risks, she should change her job and become a courier. Furious, she retorts that challenging a dungeon with a higher difficulty than stated and no clear information is basically a death wish. Suddenly, Bandana Guy interjects, asking if the reward for a bug dungeon is higher than a normal one. Ms. Lean replies that it depends on how much the actual complexity differs from the stated one. She adds that even level 14 and 15 adventurers sometimes get jealous of the drops rewarded. Just then, Cheng Hai suggests they vote on whether to stay or leave. Bandana Guy agrees, as this would save them from wasting time. She also agrees, saying that it's flexible. Just then, Ms. Lean raises her hand and asks those who want to stay to do the same. Bandana Guy and his team all raise their hands, and so do C and Cheng Hai. Only Wang and the girl refuse to continue. The girl shakes her head, thinking they're a team of idiots without proper risk assessment. Suddenly, she snaps and furiously points at Cheng Hai, shouting that while the others are strong enough, his strength is inadequate. Not even caring to explain his actual level, Cheng Hai smiles and says he still wants to give it a try. She smiles and tells Wang that since everyone has made their choice, it's time to say goodbye. He also clarifies that he'll return Wang's clearance fee later. That is, if he's still alive. Wang shakes his hand and says there's no need for that, as he's happy to cooperate. Meanwhile, the girl goes with a simple goodbye. Wang catches up to her, and they slowly fade into the distance. The team finds themselves in the middle of another dilemma. Should they go on the right path or the left one? She smiles and proposes solving the problem with a game of rock, paper, scissors. As the two battle it out, the rest of the team is in disbelief that they're acting like toddlers. Suddenly, C waves his hands in victory as Bandana Guy grits his teeth, saying he should have gone with scissors. Meanwhile, Ms. Lean tells Cheng Hai not to engage with the boss when it appears, but instead, he should focus on clearing mobs. She claims that he should keep them from interrupting her spellcasting. Elsewhere, Lazy Girl and Wang walk through the forest. Suddenly, Wang awkwardly asks why she dislikes them so much, and if the dungeon is really that dangerous. The girl frowns and asks why he thinks she dislikes them, So Wang replies that he's a businessman and a good judge of character. Just then, the girl points to the red title above her head, warning of danger. She explains that her title warns her of mortal danger, and she sensed two such entities in the crypt. Combined with information from the association, she concludes this is an incredibly rare and dangerous two-boss dungeon, requiring 3 to 5 adventurers per boss. In this case, their small group won't be able to clear it. Wiping sweat from his face, Wang asks why she hadn't told them this. The girl then replies that if she told them, black market information merchants would know about her title by tomorrow. She wonders why she should sacrifice her interests to keep them alive, when they're just mere strangers. As their temporary teammate, she tried to convince them, but it's not her fault they didn't listen. Hearing her long rant, Wang smiles awkwardly and asks why she's telling him this. The girl replies that he's not much of an adventurer and doesn't need the money, so he won't sell her out. They continue walking until the girl stops, staring ahead with horror at the dungeon's exit. She says they can't go further because worse dangers lurk outside. She senses a man waiting outside, and it's most probably the criminal looking for Cheng Hai. Meanwhile, Ms. Lean uses her spells to kill some of the goblins, burning them to crisps. C, standing in the middle of the flames, is impressed with the elemental armor that Lin gave her, as he finally sees its purpose. Seeing her powers firsthand, Bandana Guy says that Ms. Lean truly deserves an official adventurer. They're both level 5, but her title, profession, skills, and equipment have all been upgraded to the same level. On top of that, she's also the most difficult to match in terms of a complete set of magic equipment and skills. Meanwhile, Stee commends Ms. Lean's attack, while she wipes off her sweat in exhaustion. She then assigns Bandana Guy and his men to handle the next wave of goblins, which they accept nervously. Unbeknownst to them, an ominous figure is approaching. Suddenly, Cheng Hai notices a red dialogue box indicating that an unregistered boss has increased the dungeon's overall rating. Just then, she turns around and sees the approaching goblin shaman, the level 6 unrecorded boss. Behind the shaman is a horde of goblin minions. She wonders if it's the boss, noting its slight difference from normal goblins. However, Bandana Guy says it might not be, as it's small and blends in with the regular goblins. Just then, Ms. Lean urgently shouts that it's a goblin shaman and warns everyone to be careful. The adventurers draw their weapons and prepare to fight. Meanwhile, the goblin shaman grins, points his staff forward, and the goblin warriors charge. Ms. Lean points forward and urges them to deal with the shaman quickly before more mobs show up, explaining the danger if they don't finish fast. With a determined look, the men prepare to fight. However, before they could start, a thud suddenly echoes from the cave wall, and a crack appears. Cheng Hai turns in surprise as an explosion reveals a huge goblin swinging a sword at Ms. Lean. Gritting her teeth in surprise, she wonders when goblins started using battle strategies. She covers her face with her hands, ready to accept the blow. Just then, Cheng Hai blocks the strike with a dark purple-bladed sword, his title to live and to die again, above his head. Cheng Hai then tells Ms. Lean to retreat and leave the big guy to him. C and Bandana Guy fight off the goblin warriors. Noticing Ms. Lean and Cheng Hai in trouble, C shouts that Ms. Lean needs help, but Bandana Guy angrily retorts that they need help themselves. Cheng Hai, barely holding off the huge goblin's sword, shouts for Ms. Lean to help the others, while he handles the goblin. She protests, but Cheng Hai insists she would only be in the way. Trembling, Ms. Lean clenches her teeth and runs to the others, promising to deal with the shaman quickly and then help him afterward. Just then, the buffed goblin slams its sword into the ground, creating a shockwave and a crater. He grins, thinking he killed Cheng Hai, but he quickly notices that he failed. Cheng Hai, standing in the clearing dust, tells the goblin no one will bother them now. He then points his sword at the goblin, challenging it to attack. Cheng Hai suddenly activates Dancing with Death, wherein if he enters the state of dangling on the edge of life, the damage received will triple. He also activates the Step and Kill, which will allow him to see the opponent's next move in advance if his perception is greater than 18. Just then, the goblin's veins bulge with anger as it leaps at Cheng Hai. Swinging its sword, Cheng Hai slides between the goblin's legs, slicing it with a swift motion. Cheng Hai smiles, thinking that although the boss is strong, he's too clumsy. He should be able to dodge its attacks, even without using the Step and Kill skill. Meanwhile, the goblin, bleeding purple from its leg, turns red and breathes furiously. It screams in rage, entering the frenzied state, where pain tolerance increases, sanity decreases by half, and speed and strength increase. This surprises Cheng Hai, and he quickly realizes that this bozo just went into frenzy mode. The goblin suddenly charges, swinging its sword in anger. Cheng Hai dodges several attacks, thinking it's too easy. Despite the goblin's increased strength and speed, the goblin's attacks are also unplanned, making them easier to dodge. Calmly, Cheng Hai assumes it's a standard level 5 dungeon boss, and he finds it a little anticlimactic. Suddenly, he knocks the weapon from the goblin's hands with a slash, sinking it into the ground behind him. Awkward. The goblin grips his wrist, shaking from the impact. Suddenly, Cheng Hai tells the goblin he isn't even worthy of being his appetizer. Just then, the goblin gets startled and turns green, and it runs away in fear. Once he's alone, Cheng Hai notes that the goblin lacks the courage to fight to the end. Watching the goblin retreat through the hole in the wall, he decides not to have false expectations about level 5 dungeons. Meanwhile, Bandana Guy and their companions are fighting against a horde of goblin warriors. On the other hand, Ms. Lean deflects the purple projectiles from the goblin shaman's staff with fire projectiles from her hand. Brandishing his weapon, Bandana Guy shouts tensely about the seemingly endless number of goblins in the crypt. Just then, C turns to Ms. Lean and urges her to use fire magic again. With her brows drawn tight, she shouts back as she wants to, but the goblin shaman's low-level spells are hindering her. Just then, Steve finds a blue dialogue box in front of him, announcing that the task is completed. C asks in surprise when he managed to complete the task, while Bandana Guy says his tasks are also completed, defending herself against the purple projectiles. Ms. Lee mentions that their tasks are completed because Cheng Hai has killed a huge goblin. She also tells the brute to hold on for a bit longer, because he should join them soon. However, Bandana Guy says Cheng Hai has completed the task, and there is no point in risking himself. The man with brass knuckles suggests they leave, since their task is done. However, Ms. Lean argues that if they don't kill the shaman, their escape routes will be cut off by the goblins he controls. She says that Ms. Lean is right, but another guy argues that he makes it sound so easy. Just then, behind the grinning goblin shaman, a sound comes from the cave wall. Out of nowhere, the wall explodes, and out comes Cheng Hai. With a single swing of his sword, Cheng Hai chops off the goblin shaman's head. Now that's an MC. The goblin shaman's head tumbles on the floor, its blood flooding its own corpse. Seeing two of their bosses dead, the other goblin warriors run for their lives. Bandana Guy's jaw meets the floor, wondering where C got this man, who just slaved through a dual boss dungeon. C scratches his face, as he's still not able to grasp everything that happened. Just then, Cheng Hai smiles awkwardly, asking them to keep his skills a secret. Ms. Lean points out that it makes sense, since some people wouldn't want to miss out on an aspiring star like him, and he shouldn't reveal himself until this level is high enough because he might get taken advantage of. Cheng Hai raises his hand and smiles, thanking them for their understanding. Just then, Cheng Hai's reaction changes when he notices that the girl and Wang have returned to the cave. Earlier, the girl explained to Wang that a much deadlier danger awaits outside. Wang asked what it was, and the girl said that it was an adventurer worse than the two bosses in the dungeon. He's stronger than the dungeon bosses, and running into him might get them both killed. Horrified, Wang asked what they should do, and she suggested finding the others to convince them to get out together. At present, Wang and the girl look at the adventurers in surprise, asking if they actually killed two bosses. Just then, the man in the jacket points at Cheng Hai, boasting that he handled them on his own. She wonders how he did it, given her skill testing showed he wasn't a threat to her. Suddenly, Ms. Lean crosses her arms and asks how the girl knew there were two bosses in the dungeon. She wonders if the girl observed them fight after she said she was leaving. The girl explains that she learned about it due to her title, which helps her recognize dangers, including evil creatures, and that there are two bosses in the dungeon. C is pissed, so he asks why she didn't warn them beforehand. Frowning, the girl reminds them that she did advise them not to continue deeper into the dungeon. Just then, Cheng Hai asks why she came back, so she replies that someone much stronger than the two bosses is waiting for them at the exit, a high-level adventurer who blocked the way. The adventurers pause in shock, wondering what this could mean for them. Meanwhile, Ms. Lean asks if she is sure the door is blocked by high-level adventurers, and the girl affirms it. Just then, Bandana Guy grabs C by the collar, furious that there are too many suspicious things going on, such as the bug and the higher-level adventurer's threat. He demands to know if C has something to do with it. However, Steve shouts back that he didn't do anything, and suggests signing a special contract if he doesn't believe him. Meanwhile, Cheng Hai tries to guess who the threat is. It's possible that home is everywhere. The guy who didn't show up could be the culprit. From this perspective, he should have been present at the time as well. It's just that he happened to be outside Cheng Hai's perception range. Turning to the girl, Cheng Hai asks if her title can tell which of them is stronger, the mysterious adventurer or him. She replies affirmatively, so Cheng Hai prepares for what he's going to do. Just then, 3 red dialogue boxes and dark purple energy appear between Cheng Hai and the girl. The dialogue boxes announce that the professional skill Dance with Death has been activated, along with strength and agility bonuses. The girl looks at him in surprise, not expecting that he has so many hidden skills. Engulfed in dark purple energy, Cheng Hai, with the title Rising from the Brink of Death, asks which of them is stronger now. Everyone stares at him, mouths hanging open. Meanwhile, the girl replies that the guy outside is a little stronger. Hearing this, Cheng Hai calmly replies that he understands, and then he switches his powers off. Suddenly, Ms. Lean says there is only one way out. Complete their missions first, and then try to attack the adventurer together. Bandana Guy grits his teeth and agrees, while C tenses up, saying that if he had known, he would face so many problems after buying this dungeon, he wouldn't have gone for it. He then turns around. Cheng Hai suddenly tells him that regretting it now won't change anything. Besides, there are a lot of them in the team, so they might just stand a chance against the mysterious adventurer. Meanwhile, on the other side of the dungeon entrance, Yao Chunyang grows impatient. He wonders how long it's been, and he starts to speculate that Cheng Hai must have gotten lost. In the cave, everyone checks their adventure panels. After completing their tasks, Cheng Hai checks his panel, and it marks that he also completed the settlement. Now that he has improved abilities, he can now challenge the Fisherman Dungeon again, which is the first one he ever entered. It's about time he redeemed himself. The report also lists new titles including Goblin Hunter, Stealth Art, Guardian, Born from Death. He also scored a hidden class Deathwalker's exclusive kill, Born from Death. On top of that, he also acquired the Goblin Shaman's Flute, which allows him to summon a goblin to fight for him at random. Lastly, he received the Goblin Clan's Legacy Book and acquired legendary grade artifact, which is called the Goblin's Secret Potion. Just then, Cheng Hai frowns slightly when he notices that he didn't get any epic items this time and finds the 2-boss dungeon easier than the graveyard. At this point, he can just skip level 6 and directly attempt level 7 for the next dungeon. Opening his status screen, Cheng Hai reviews his titles, identifying those that will be useful in future battles. Playing a Fool to Catch a Tiger, Miracle Survivor, Facing Legends, Adaptability, Stealth Art, and Guardian. Cheng Hai plans to use Playing a Fool to Catch a Tiger to infiltrate the enemy's blind spot, then activate Stealth Art, followed by Rising from the Brink of Death, and Step and Kill for a perfect strike. He intends to switch between Facing Legends and Guardian to gain perception, and anticipate the opponent's moves and switch to Guardian to improve his chances against his stronger foe. This strategy sounds foolproof. Although confident in his titles and tactics, Cheng Hai still finds his choices somewhat risky. To ensure his decisions are sound, he examines the adventurer's panel and reviews all the items he has received. The dialogue box lists his professional skills: Dancing with Death, Step and Kill, Feign Death, and Rising from the Brink of Death. Cheng Hai says that the Rising from the Brink of Death skill is quite good, as it improves his agility and flexibility based on his proximity to death. If he combines that with Step and Kill, he can target the enemy's vital points while dodging. He also notes that the Feign Death skill is advantageous, especially considering that in the real world, adventurers don't drop loot upon death. He can effectively use this skill to fake death and seize the opportunity to deliver surprise attacks and counterattacks. Cheng Hai thinks that if the adventurer blocking the exit isn't crazy enough to fight a corpse, his plan will work. Of course, that scenario will be a last resort. He can still win fair and square. However, he's not sure if the adventurer blocking their path would intentionally refrain from killing them to take the rare items in their inventory. With this, he decides to take a peek at the items that he has. While reviewing, he says that the items are good, especially the Bone Flute, Shaman's Banner, and Heritage Book, which could be useful in the future. He adds that the elixir could also be beneficial, and that the flute could get him a Goblin Warrior. Given that the mysterious adventurer might be 2 or 3 levels stronger than him, he decides to hoard the upgrade vouchers, equipment vouchers, and equipment furnaces. He also plans to maximize his strength first. Just then, a helmet with long metal horns appears in his hand. which is Claude's legendary undead helmet. Cheng Hai recalls Leader saying that this item has the highest level among all his items and suggests using the coupons on it. Leader also mentioned that it doesn't matter how the improvement goes, since he will still have a couple of coupons left. With this, Cheng Hai applies the unique item upgrade voucher on Claude's helmet. The helmet in his hands glows, but a dialogue box with red text suddenly appears, stating that the item has reached an epic level and the coupon can't be used. Cheng Hai is shocked as he discovers that it can only be upgraded to an epic level. There's nothing he can do about it, so he puts the helmet on his head and flips through the adventurer's panel. He now plans to use the equipment smelter to melt down the unused equipment artifacts, and then he'll decide whether to use the artifact upgrade voucher on the contaminated sword or on the new melted down equipment. He then selects a furnace in his inventory, and a dialogue box with several items appears. He turns on the furnace, and another dialogue box appears, stating that the arsonist tool, sea whisper, and ghostly portrait frame are not considered equipment, which means that this failure will not have any deductions from the smelting count. This disappoints Cheng Hai a little bit, as non-equipment type artifacts can't be used as materials. He realizes that the low-end items he has that can be used are the Murloc Spear and the Longsword. Even if he forcibly smelt them, he won't get anything good. He doesn't really have a choice, so he decides to use the artifact upgrade voucher to enhance the contaminated sword. With this, Cheng Hai upgrades the sword, allowing him to increase his strength, agility, and constitution during battle. Seeing the sword's final form, Cheng Hai smiles, noting that it is indeed a cool sword. With the helmet and weapons sorted out, he will now use the equipment voucher scroll on his chainmail. Well, it's about time to replace the one he got on Amazon. He then applies the voucher, and the dialogue box announces that the exchange is successful and that the equipment upgrade coupon has been used. Cheng Hai now wears a large, dark long armor. What a glow-up. Looking at it, he says it's lighter than the chainmail he used to wear. Suddenly, Ms. Lean approaches and asks if he's finished, and he replies that he's almost done. He then asks if they're done preparing everything, and Ms. Lean replies that it's all set. She adds that she will give him another round of buffs, and then they can go. While the two talk, C checks out Cheng Hai's new outfit, exclaiming that it looks very cool. He can't even believe that Cheng Hai got it from mere drops in the dungeon. Just then, Cheng Hai asks Ms. Lean to give him a second, because he will summon a goblin follower. He's really pulling out his trump cards for this. Meanwhile, C is growing frustrated, because Cheng Hai isn't paying him any attention. Just then, Cheng Hai acquires the goblin bone flute in his hand, blowing it to summon a goblin, which kinda looks like Yoda and Golem's love child. Bandana Guy is unimpressed. He grabs the goblin's head with one hand, raising it into the air as it squirms. He says summoning it doesn't even do much because that puny goblin doesn't even count as a 0.5 combat power. As long as it doesn't hinder them, then Bandana Guy can give this green minion a free pass. Just then, Cheng Hai claims that he isn't done yet, bringing out the goblin's elixir in his hand. He tosses it to the little goblin, but it's skeptical about following his command. However, when it spots Cheng Hai's goblin shaman banner, its inner patriotism activates and immediately drinks the elixir. The Bandana Guy, still holding the goblin's head, looks at it with one eyebrow raised. Large blisters begin to form on the goblin's body, and the Bandana Guy, horrified, throws it to the ground, asking what Cheng Hai has given it. The goblin's body is covered in swellings, and it shouts loudly, reaching out its hand. Cheng Hai watches with a smirk, while Ms. Lean and C stare in surprise. The goblin grows huge and examines its new body in astonishment. C asks if the goblin has turned into a boss. The naked goblin dances happily as Cheng Hai observes it in silence, dissatisfied with its ding-dong flashing on his face. He calls out to the goblin and points to the goblin boss's body, saying its clothes and weapons are just right for it. The goblin obediently runs towards the body, ashamed of flashing its parts to everyone. The Bandana Guy, pointing fearfully at the goblin, asks if it will get out of control. Cheng Hai replies indifferently that he doesn't know. With a smirk, Cheng Hai tells the girl to use her title to check if the goblin is hostile. The girl's eyes light up red as she examines the goblin rummaging through the fallen boss's belongings, and she assures them they don't have to worry. Meanwhile, the goblin snuggles happily against the huge sword. This goblin is so girly pop. Hearing this, the Bandana Guy sighs in relief. Ms. Lean, holding a hand to her face, prays to the goddess of magic for divine power. Later on, the adventurers stand in the forest as Lean holds out her palm and announces magic armor and bear endurance attributes. Suddenly, purple energy radiates from her hand, directed towards Cheng Hai, who smiles as he notices his improved physical performance. Wiping her face tiredly, Lin says the buffs will only last for an hour, and explains that magic armor can protect even uncovered parts, though it can't compare to Cheng Hai's armor. Suddenly, she turns around to find the goblin standing before her, smiling enthusiastically and asking her to apply effects on him too. A contented goblin, now surrounded by red energy, flexes his biceps under the effect of the bull's strength. Meanwhile, Lin lies exhausted on the ground, and a worried Sea asks if she's okay. Later on, the dungeon entrance lights up with green energy, and 3 silhouettes appear in it. Meanwhile, Yao Chengyang observes them excitedly, eager to kill Cheng Hai. However, his eyes suddenly widen in surprise when he sees a huge goblin among the adventurers. Just then, Sea looks around and asks why no one is blocking the exit as predicted. Cheng Hai replies that they're probably hiding. So he asks the girl to scan when he is. She agrees, her eyes lighting up red, as she states that he is hiding behind a tree. Suddenly, a silhouette of Gao Chengyang is visible behind the tree, with several beast traps set on the ground in front of the entrance. Suddenly, Gao Chengyang reveals himself to everyone, asking if they have any titles or professions related to detection. He says it's a nuisance, then steps out from hiding. Cheng Hai stares intently at him, recognizing him as a vendor from the market. He thinks it makes sense, as the vendor came to the Eastern Mountain to try his luck instead of going to the black market. He could have just gone next door to the Enchanted Forest, which was just raided. Only a few people know that Cheng Hai is in the Eastern Mountain. The team leader, who signed a confidentiality agreement with him, the nurse, Shang Li, and Shu Mao. Meanwhile, Ms. Lin stares at Gao Chengyang, recognizing him through his disguise. Pointing at him with a furious gaze, she reveals his true identity to everyone. Wang suddenly asks if he's famous, and Ms. Lin reveals that he is the most wanted criminal in the Mean Guang area. Even though he's only at the 7th level, the number of adventurers who have died at his hands, numbers not in the tens, but in the hundreds. Furthermore, rumor has it that his thirst to kill is not just rooted in acquiring others' belongings, but from a desire for a special title. He might have already earned the title Excessive Slaughter, which means he's around level 9. Damn, this guy is ripped. Just then, Chengyang activates the Excessive Slaughter title and says that Ms. Lin knows him well. As he asks if she's an official adventurer of the association, he takes off his hidden in plain sight title. Seeing the shift in his aura, Ms. Lin confirms that he truly earned the Excessive Slaughter title. Just then, Chengyang strikes a deal with her, saying that he'll let everyone go if they leave Cheng Hai behind. One of the adventurers says this condition is acceptable, but Ms. Lin shoots him a death stare. She claims that Gao Chengyang's records have a history of letting targets go before hunting them down. If they believe this villain's schemes, they will hunt them one by one after he kills Cheng Hai. The girl in the pink hoodie supports Ms. Lin's claims, saying that his malice hasn't diminished, indicating that he's lying. With a pissed look, Chengyang stares at the girl and asks if she can also detect malicious intentions. Just then, Cheng Hai speaks up, suggesting a plan. Since he's the target, he will lead the attack with the goblin warrior, while the others support him from the sides. He claims that they're all in the same boat now, so they shouldn't have any expectations from the enemy. Suddenly, Cheng Hai stares at the guy who wants to sell him out, hinting that anyone who is scared of dying should leave so they won't drag him down. The guy is obviously peeing his pants at this point. Meanwhile, Ms. Lin reassures Cheng Hai that they'll do their best to support him. Chengyang is amused by Cheng Hai's good nature, and he says if it were him, he'd force everyone to fight together. Cheng Hai suddenly replies with a cold stare, saying that he and the goblin are enough to handle him. Chengyang smiles, but he's thinking lowly of Cheng Hai, as he's just a novice adventurer who got lucky with an S-rank evaluation. He then brings up the adventurer panel, thinking it's usually hard for level 1 to 5 adventurers to get decent titles, professions, and equipment. Suddenly, weapons appear in Gao Chengyang's hands, as he tells Cheng Hai that his weapons and armor might seem nice, but they're all drops from the Enchanted Forest and the graveyard. He then showcases his weapon, saying that his skills counter novices like Cheng Hai. Suddenly, Cheng Hai charges toward Chengyang, and the goblin follows after him. However, Chengyang uses a spell on him, forcing him to slow down against his will. As he continues running, Cheng Hai notices that his speed has slowed down. Just then, Chengyang appears in front of him, swinging his weapon in preparation for an attack. With an evil stare, Chengyang tells him he's an idiot, for thinking that a slowdown spell will only affect his running speed. He claims that facing someone who uses a scythe, like him, will only prevent Cheng Hai from adapting and responding to his attacks. If he's under a slowdown spell, he will also be prevented from responding to attacks on time. However, Cheng Hai suddenly tells Cheng Yang to reconsider his assumptions, snapping out of the spell's influence. Just then, he stops the scythe with a single hand, making it bleed. A figure of claws suddenly appears behind him, making Cheng Yang freeze in horror. Cheng Hai says he's sorry for Cheng Yang because his skills are mediocre. Unfortunately for him, he just met his match on this fateful day. Out of nowhere, the goblin appears behind Cheng Yang, ready to squash him like a fly. Cheng Yang narrowly dodges the attack, retreating to a corner. He's taken aback by Cheng Hai's actions and can barely believe that he countered his foolproof combo. He stares at Cheng Hai, who's still holding the scythe, and he wonders if this is really the level of a newcomer who has only cleared 2 dungeons.